Testing. There we go. Okay, now I don't know why the hello everyone. Or hey everyone, Anark here. Yeah, the video just got messed up somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. That was pretty weird. Oh. Okay. I think everything is in order. You know, it just took me, what was that? A solid 10 minutes getting everything in order. Oh, is it actually fixed? I think it's fixed. It looks fixed in the streaming software. Let's see. Catch me up to, yes. And then sound. It looks, yes. It's fixed. I'm so good at this. I probably should have made sure that all of my hardware was working before I started the live stream. This one's going to be really hard to rewatch. People are going to be very confused for the first 10 minutes if they ever rewatch this live stream. Off to a great start. Yeah, so I don't really have any plan for this stream. I was just going to probably talk with y'all. You know that I can ramble with the best of them, so I'm sure I can keep this stream going pretty well indefinitely. But yeah, how's everybody doing today? I hope you're doing well. Already got 27 concurrent viewers. Not bad, not bad. All right. Mostly just memeing here. Are you doing anything for Halloween since it's Friday the 13th? No, well, I was going to go out to the fair maybe, but that's about it. I didn't really have anything fancy planned. Just doing stuff. I'm a real spoil sport, I guess. I don't really care too much about most holidays, but yeah, I mean, I don't even have an outfit, so I haven't done very good planning, I guess. That's what it appears. But yeah, if you're here, go click the like button, because then I think that pushes it forward. Oh yeah, there's some Mountain Dew product placement. Yeah, sorry. Just getting my bearings here, because the beginning of the stream, I thought I had it handled, you know? I was like, okay, I'm ready, sitting down, ready to go, ready to do this stream, and then all of the hardware difficulties. So now I'm kind of trying to get my head back in the game. Was a little confused there for a minute. But yeah, no, I didn't even know that today was, Friday the 13th. Wow, that's incredible. But wait, Halloween is today? How? I thought Halloween was on the same day. Yeah, it's October 31st. Okay, so that's what I thought. I was really confused there for a second. Yeah, as Grinning Guys has mentioned, I think a lot of people their heads are everybody's minds are probably thinking about what's happening in Palestine right now. And, I already commented on that on Twitter. For me, I think it was helpful that I was reading The Wretched of the Earth while this was all happening. And yeah, no, it's been very disturbing seeing the responses to essentially what is a continued genocide of the Palestinian people, and seeing how many people in the United States just kind of uncritically sided with Israel. And even some radicals really weren't sure how to respond. It was very easy to get people sort of confused and to get people into a sort of a both sides mentality with all of this. And I just want to say that even if you don't support Hamas itself, which is understandable, I suppose, not supporting the Palestinian people is indefensible. You know, the Palestinian people rising up to try to end the occupation of Gaza is a good thing. No matter how you look at it, it's a good thing that they are trying to do so. That doesn't mean that you have to defend every single action they do. It doesn't mean that, once again, you have to defend Hamas as an entity, but it's not just about Hamas. They want everybody to be talking about Hamas because that distracts from the overall dynamics of the problem. Hamas is just one entity. There are many entities that are involved with the Palestinian liberation struggle. And I see that there's just this constant focus on the things, the terrifying things that were done during the first wave when Palestine, essentially broke through the border wall and went into Israel. And people are understandably upset by some of the things that were done there. But there is, I would say, kind of a hyper focus on the things that were perhaps done wrong there, and not a focus on the fact that they are living in an open air prison. Or, as somebody pointed out, it's not a prison, it's a concentration camp, because a prison means that you've done something wrong, right? You've broken a law. They didn't break a law. They were just Palestinian. And the Israelis, or rather the Israeli state, didn't want them to exist. So it's more like a concentration camp. They're being kept there because of their ethnic and national background, not because they've broken a law, which is would make it a prison. So it's essentially a big open air concentration camp. And so it's understandable that they are going to lash out in a violent sense. And in fact, as Fanon tells us in Wretched of the Earth, that is basically the requisite for any successful national liberation struggle. And that's what we've seen. They are going to, in fact, have to lash out in a violent sense if they want to get anything done. So, yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, Riveroon says, all of the Western media is complicit in the genocide. It's infuriating and absolutely horrifying. Yeah, no, it absolutely is, to the degree where, like right before I came on here, I saw where some news agency, I think it was Reuters, had a journalist there in Palestine, and the journalist was killed by Israelis' indiscriminate carpet bombing, essentially. And instead of saying, Israel murdered our journalist by indiscriminate carpet bombing, they were just like, our journalist died. I mean, sorry to laugh. It's not funny, but it's absurd. It's absurd, right? Oh, I forgot. I should probably tell people that this stream is happening. Let's see. See, where is the link? Surprisingly hard for me to find right now. There we go. There we go. Okay, I put the link in a few places. That should be helpful there. John says, do most of the people in the USA support Israel or Palestine? Oh, wow. I just saw that it started ads right as I was saying that. That's terrible. Terrible timing. I'll wait just a second before responding to that. What do I do about that? Yeah, most people here in the United States support Israel. I've actually been shocked to find that even some regular people, like just people here in town, they are giving like support statements to Israel, saying how they support Israel, like where they stand with Israel against the terrible terrorists. And the media has manufactured the narrative very successfully, very, very successfully. The fact that there is no dissent anywhere within the power structure nor the news agencies, it really has succeeded. It really reminds me, and numerous people have said this, but it reminds me of what it was like right after 9/11. There is this incredibly one-sided portrayal of the events. There's zero nuance, no attempt at education of the past of the events. And insofar as there is any education, it's almost miseducation. They're telling a very one-sided story. Our news agencies are complicit. Our government is not only complicit, but is helping and has been helping Israel maintain this concentration camp for a very long time at this point. So even regular people I see here in town, even on the social media I have, that's like my normie social media, where it's just like I see my friends or people, just acquaintances and stuff. I've been shocked to see how many of them have just kind of mindlessly sided with Israel, knowing nothing about the conflict. Not to say all of them, I should say. I think it's probably something closer to like 50-50, but even 50-50 is shocking when Israel's carrying out a genocide. They say, yeah, I really don't get how anybody can support Israel. Even with the amount of disinformation, it's pretty clear that the Palestinian people are undergoing a genocide. Yeah, you'd think, but when you've got all of the media and the government saying one thing, it tends to bring people to a particular conclusion. Yeah, if Egypt opened a humanitarian corridor, the Israeli occupation would never let them back into Gaza. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but also like a ton of them want to leave. But I'm pretty sure one of the first things Israel did was bomb the corridor between Gaza and Egypt. Nobody can escape. It's like impossible. I saw one person talking about how there's just fire everywhere. And in a lot of the places that they would want to escape, there's just, rubble and destruction, and they just can't leave. Literally, Israel has just trapped them now in Gaza and is just bombing them to death. It's horrific. Truly, truly horrific. Yeah, many news agencies invited a Palestinian ambassador whose family was murdered, and they just kept asking about Hamas. Yeah, I saw that. That one was very disturbing. He did as best a job as he could of navigating that interview, but they just over and over and over. Do you condemn this? Do you condemn that? Do you condemn this? And he's just like, yeah, but can we not talk about anything else? Like, am I just going to sit here just like having to condemn this, condemn that? It's like, it's obvious how they use that as a tactic to completely derail any substantive conversation about the dynamics between Palestine and Israel, such that, obviously, I'm not that guy, and I'm not going to say he did anything wrong necessarily, but like the obvious thing is you want to turn it back around and be like, do you condemn what Israel has done? Do you condemn the fact that Israel's killed like 500 children? Like, I think it's up to like 700 now in like the first few days of this process. Like, do you condemn the concentration camp, the Palestinian concentration camps? Of course not. I mean, I understand it would be hard to keep one's head straight when in the middle of an interview where you're literally like, yeah, numerous of my family members have died. And they're like, do you condemn Hamas? And just like utterly inhuman, utterly inhuman. There was another interview where one of these Palestinian ambassadors fared far better in holding his own. And I think they didn't even intend to invite him on. They thought he was someone else. And he clarified once the interview started. And he really laid it all out. It was a much better interview. No offense intended to the guy who was just being harangued with, do you condemn, do you condemn, do you condemn? But, Yeah, people support Israel most of the time out of a belief that failing to support the state is equivalent toward anti-Semitism. It doesn't help that Hamas is anti-Semitic. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good assessment there. A lot of Jewish people for a long time now have been trying to disentangle, that Israel is not the Jews, quote unquote. Israel is a state, and it is a ethno-nationalist state. And so it tends towards trying to claim itself as being the representative of that ethnicity. And so as soon as you criticize it, it tries to say that you are criticizing that ethnicity. It's kind of like what authoritarians do with their vanguard parties, where their vanguard is a representation of the proletariat. So if you criticize the vanguard, you're criticizing the actions of the proletariat. This is kind of part of I call this like the myth of representation, and it's at the center of the state's mythology. The state's mythology says that it is a representation of the people of its nation, and that when it acts, the people are acting. It's like it's acting instead of the people. And this is the fundamental delusion of the state. This is the reason that the state is able to manage so much nationalistic fervor, that it is able to protect itself from criticism to an extensive degree. And here we see that Israel is using it and is weaponizing any criticisms of Israel as being anti-Semitism. Reminds me once again of authoritarians doing the same thing. If you try to criticize authoritarian states as they arose in Africa or Central and South America, they kind of make the same sorts of gambits. But I and lots of people have pointed out that it's actually anti-Semitic to say that any criticism of Israel is a criticism of Jewish people, because it is to say that the actions of Israel are the actions of Jewish people, and that is homogenizing, that is prejudiced towards Jewish people to assume that they all are monolithic and support the actions of Israel, and they absolutely do not. Both inside Israel and outside Israel, Jewish people can be very critical of Israel. As usual, the chat has moved on while I am back on an old question. Let's see here. It says, I'm actually surprised to be hearing more about Palestine on mainstream media. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I pretty much only watch like snippets and clips that are on my feed. I don't watch TV. My TV isn't even hooked up. My TV acts like a monitor. I don't even watch TV. Hello from California. Currently reading biographies of Proudhon and Nestor Makhno. Cool. Hope you enjoy that. Both interesting people. Yeah. Somebody here says, I feel offended that everyone just forgot about Russia and Ukraine. Putin have to do some real shit to give us our attention back. That's the thing. And I was actually going to mention this to somebody the other day, is like, we are currently there are like multiple major crises happening across the planet right now. Like, nobody is talking about like Azerbaijan trying to massacre the Armenians all over again. There is a current conflict that is brewing in Kosovo. You have Rojava. Rojava is being bombed, and a bunch of like critical infrastructure is being destroyed by the Turkish military right now. This is all happening all at the same time. And as you say, Russia and Ukraine is still taking place. This is an extremely bloody time. This is a very, very dangerous, tumultuous time in human history. This will be put in history books, and not for good reasons. It is horrifying. We are living through a horrifying time. So it's very hard to keep anyone's attention, even on truly horrific things that are taking place, because there are so many horrific things taking place all at once. And, as I just mentioned there, some of them aren't even getting the first scale of attention, right? Nobody's talking about Rojava and Turkey. Nobody's talking about Azerbaijan and the Armenians. And those aren't the only examples. Like, I know I'm leaving more out. People have been telling me about more. And it's like, everybody has only this limited amount of attention that they can invest. And it's so hard to invest that attention everywhere it needs to be invested. It's disturbing. And I think one of the only things that we can do as anarchists is always try to bring people's attention back to what can you do? What kind of structures can you build? I'm not saying, get people not to pay attention to those world events. Those are important, and we need to be able to show solidarity, and we need to be fluent in understanding the events of the world. But we also, if it is the case that this is going to keep on going and going and going and going, which I'm sorry to tell y'all, but it probably is. Like, we are just kind of in one of those periods of time. These things are not going to unravel quickly. They're probably going to unravel over the course of like a decade or more. Then we're going to have to figure out how to keep our heads above this torrent. We're going to have to figure out how to focus ourselves back on the actions we can do right now where we're at, and the structures that we can build right now where we're at. While also still recognizing that things are really bad elsewhere. Because if we are constantly just paying attention to what's happening abroad and we can't refocus our minds upon what we can actually do, then like I said, I mean, this might unravel over the course of, years or decades, and we're going to have to be able to walk and chew bubblegum, as they say. So very, very disturbing, but yeah. Zerka says, hello, first stream, welcome. This question is unrelated to the topic, but what do you think of post-left anarchism? I'm not going to pretend to be well-read, but what I will say is what I have read, I just don't really agree with their categorization of what the left is. I actually agree with some of their criticisms. I just don't agree that the left is supposed to be a grouping of affinity. I think the left is just really a political theoretic grouping. You don't need to agree with the other people that are in that political theoretic grouping. It's just a way for us to group ideologies with similar tenets. So, but once again, not an expert, so really not going to weigh in much further than that. What do I think about anarcho-egoism and anarcho-nihilism? My take on egoism, you can find in part 2 of A Modern Anarchism. My take on nihilism, you can find in Hope. Those are both up to be read. They're also videos, so you can either watch them or read them. Rowan says, would you ever consider doing a video on citizen state or night watchman anarchism? There's some interesting concepts, and it might sway legalists and people who think that anarchism equals lawlessness. I've never heard of those, but just by kind of reading their names, I'm going to assume that there's some form of minarchism, and no, would not support minarchism. I don't think that that would be helpful. I think that that would just lead to a runaway state. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Trying to catch up. Elisha, hello. How are you? Let's see. In Greece, I think it's 50-50, despite the fact that the government and most of the media support Israel. Well, that's good that it's even there when you have that, but it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. I think a lot of people, they really don't even comment because they don't feel like they know enough. But we as anarchists should claim we have no solutions to the problem between Israel and Palestine, because whereas we have an ideologically consistent solution, materially we have nothing. I mean, there's a difference between talking practically and theoretically. Theoretically, anarchists have a solution, but practically they don't. And that's mostly just because there is not an anarchist constituency or a major anarchist constituency in Palestine that could even make anything a reality that were to be suggested. And there's not, some similarly horizontalist movement that could do the same work. So anarchists, insofar as we are looking from abroad, we can say what we think theoretically, which is to say that the obvious answer is a no state solution. But the no state solution cannot take place if there are not actual bodies of citizen governance that could take over. And there really aren't, not in the sense that anarchists or horizontalists more broadly would want. So I kind of think I agree. I think, mostly it's just about assessing the lesser of two evils. But are you interested in talking to Destiny about politics since he's center-left and supports capitalism? Probably not, because I've seen the way that Destiny debates. I think Destiny really emphasizes trying to steamroll. Destiny really emphasizes trying to catch people out. I think that that he doesn't tend toward being an honest debater. I think that Destiny really likes to just try to make people look stupid. And that to me really does not amount to a good or productive debate. I think Destiny is just looking for rage fuel at this point. I think there was a time when Destiny was a smaller channel that he wasn't just looking for rage fuel, but I think at this point, that's all he really cares about. All I ever see him talk about ever are things that he just thinks are going to piss people off. Seems like that's all he wants to do is piss people off. So I don't really think that would be a productive debate. Did you hear about France banning pro-Palestinian protests? I'm pretty sure the UK is doing something similar. No, but that's horrifying. I have also heard about there being talk about people banning, quote unquote, Hamas clothing, aka probably just clothing that would be normal for people from the Middle East, people that are Arabic. Which is also horrifying. It's basically just more anti-Arabic prejudice, probably amounts as well to anti-Muslim sentiments in a bunch of places. France already has a lot of that, so it would not be shocking if they tried to do it all over again. They were also the ones who tried to ban the burqa beforehand. Imam says, clinical depression made my past 5 years into a living hell. Finding your video on hope renewed my will to carry on and not fall into nihilism. Keep up the good work, comrade. Solidarity forever. That makes me really happy to hear. Hope was me trying to produce an antidote to that very thing. I think that we spend a lot of time criticizing. People spend a lot of time sort of depression spiraling or spiraling into despair. And they spend very little time talking about why we should have hope, why hope is transformative and revolutionary. And I'm really glad to hear that it landed with you. I hope that it has landed with many more people, because I think that message in hope was one of the most important that I've ever conveyed on the channel. So let's see. Yeah, sadly, being anti-Zionism has been made a dog whistle by the far right. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. The far right has really demonized any criticism of Israel, has demonized any criticism of Zionism, because for them, it really is just, these are just, flimsy facades that are placed over their real beliefs, which is just out and out virulent anti-Semitism. And so then understandably, a lot of Jewish people are going to hear these phrases and they're going to think you're a right winger. So that means that now they have destroyed our capability to have substantive discussions about the dangers of Zionism, the dangers of the Israeli state and of ethno-nationalism, of Jewish ethno-nationalism. Oh, Okay, so I'm so far behind. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. John Doe says, sorry if this was asked before, but do you believe in lesser evilism? In other words, would you prefer Israel be replaced with a more pro-Palestinian state or not, or supporting social democracies? I think that's just like, it's just too abstracted for us to be able to talk about that in any substantive way. I mean, the truth is that it's going to play out through the dynamics that exist. Now, if there were a revolutionary, horizontal, or libertarian, socialist, or anarchist constituency, I would be advocating for that method, and I would be advocating other people advocate for that method. But that constituency isn't there. So it's like talking about our support from afar is only, an abstract concept. It's an idea. It doesn't really change their conditions to a significant degree. Now there are material things we could do that may stop our states from supporting those entities that we consider to be the worst entities. There are things we could do here to stop them from oppressing us or oppressing Arab people in our midst. But insofar as who we support from afar, which is to say, do we want Hamas to be is it between Hamas and Israel, or do we want some kind of state that has these ideal characteristics? That's something we can talk about in an abstract sense, but it has very little grounding in what's really going to happen. I think one of the things sometimes one of these mistakes we make as leftists, just thinking that discussing the ideas, discussing what would work and what should be done is itself an act of change, is itself praxis. But I really like to always reorient people to understanding that your ideas and your prescriptions only have meaning and heft insofar as you found ways to embody them in the real world. You found ways to create structures which can move forward to create those things. So it's not to say that there's not a good reason for us to spend our time talking about those ideas and our concepts, but unless we have some meaningful way to move between here and there, then we're just talking. We're just discussing these sort of abstractions. It's important that we move out of the realm of abstraction into an embodied realm. So this is why in my theory, I'm not only deconstructive, I'm constructive. I think it's very important for us to always have both elements present, because both elements are what change things. So I know that might seem kind of like a cop-out, but it really is the answer to that question. Yeah, Riveroon. And yet we see Turkey's hypocritical ruler Erdogan condemn Israel. That blew my mind. Literally, I was just mentioning that to somebody, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday. Erdogan condemns Israel for massacring innocents in Palestine, and says that the Hamas is a national liberation movement, which, okay, yeah, it seems like you're got your ideas straight here. But then at the same time, Erdogan is the head of a state which is currently destroying citizen infrastructure and killing innocent people in Rojava, and is currently suppressing Kurdish nationalism within Turkey, suppressing a national liberation movement of the Kurds. It's just the hypocrisy is wild. But of course, it's always good to remember that power structures, or hierarchical power structures, don't care about hypocrisy, and us pointing out their hypocrisy matters little, because they just don't care about inconsistency. They care about power. So, let's see here. George, or I assume that's probably Jorge. I want to translate "The State is Counter-Revolutionary" and other essays of yours to distribute among the organization I'm currently joining. How can I get in contact with you? If you are on Twitter DMs tend to be the best. If you would like to, you can email me directly, and that is the email is baryonpipeline@gmail.com. Those are really the two ways. It should be said that I check my Twitter DMs more than I check that email. So Probably better if you have Twitter to just DM me on Twitter. And my Twitter is at Anark YouTube. So JC asks, how are things going with Scissortail and Cooperation Tulsa? Scissortail is not very active right now, but Cooperation Tulsa is doing very well. We actually just overcame a very significant hump. I think that we just saw a big explosion of energy. We are now developing the land much more actively. We have a plot of land, 2.5 acres of land we call Flat Rock, which is just on the border of Tulsa. And we are currently developing it. We've got our water hooked up. We are getting it mowed regularly. We are beginning to till the land. We are remediating soil. We are doing a lot. We are preparing the land to be developed in a much more significant way than it was being beforehand. So it is Cooperation Tulsa is moving forward much more rapidly now. Elvod points out the anarchist collective Fauda is active in Palestine, but I doubt they're large in number. They're not, and that's the reason I was, not saying much there, because I support them and what they're doing, but they are clearly not an active enough contingent to be spreading anarchism to the rest of the movement, and they do not appear to have been creating these sort of bodies of citizen governance or community councils, neighborhood councils, and so on, which could actually seize any form of governance in the process. Which is not in any way to criticize them. It's just to state a reality as far as I understand it. Yeah, Riveroon points out, Destiny is not center left, he's center right. I agree. Let's see. 1W2M4T8 says, you outlined 4 main aspects of the revolution, but what is the role of the community in the revolution? Well, it depends. I don't know which 4 aspects you're talking about. There are 2 different places where I lay out 4 aspects, which I know is a little confusing. I lay out what I call the 4 pillars of prefiguration. And then I've also talked about, the four fields of a power structure. So power structures are consisting of 4 different fields, which is to say the individual conditioning, which is like ideology, psychology, etc. Then you've got interpersonality, which is people communicating with one another, your friends, your family, your coworkers, those who are just around you that you interact with. Then the third is social structures. Social structures are structures that are agglomerations of our activity at a much larger level, things that we may not even be directly active in, but that our actions sort of bolster. Negative examples might be things like white supremacy, the state, and so on. But there are also positive examples. For example, organizations are social structures, even horizontal organizations are social structures. And the fourth one is environmental structures, which is to say the land, the actual material things that we have. That would include all kinds of stuff. The means of production would be included in that. Firearms, food, many, many different things. So where does the community is embodied in several of those. I would say most primarily the community rests within an interpersonality, and in some ways it also has social structures. However, mostly I would say it's embodied in interpersonality. The people that we generally say are in a community are those we have interpersonal connection with. And I would include, for example, people that we interact with online. However, I think that creates not necessarily the same kind of community that a lot of us would like to create. So then I can see, however, in the next sentence, you're talking about the 4 pillars of prefiguration. Besides councils, does each community need to have defense, economics, and intelligence? So we're talking about the 4 pillars. So the 4 pillars are councils, defense, economics, intelligence. So these are 2 different concepts, these 4 pillars of prefiguration. These are the sorts of structures we need to create. You might imagine that this is mostly an answer to, in that third category, social structures. These are the social structures that we need to make, basically. We need to create councils, which are places for people to come together and make decisions together. We need to have defense, which is, say, some way to keep ourselves safe. That not only includes our ability to stop violence or to do violence if it's necessary, but also, for example, to harm reduction, to intervene when people are in a bad place and to make sure that they're going to be okay. These things are also part of defense. Economics, these things like cooperatives, mutual aid networks, forms of direct distribution or decommodification. And intelligence is us making sure that we have information about the enemy. This would involve, doing research on fascists, which is, say, anti-fascist research, publishing that information. It would be, for example, embedding in enemy structures. It would be going and doing some forms of spycraft. So these are the 4 sorts of social structures that have to be created. So, community is something that is not necessarily embedded in these 4 things. Community is kind of something that lies more in interpersonality and social structure. It's something kind of rests on the boundary of both of those. But does every community need those? Probably, if it wants to have any, ability to really embody itself in something that could form into a robust power structure. If it doesn't have those 4 things, it will probably have a very serious weak spot. Imagine it had a council, but it doesn't have defense, economics, or intelligence. Well, then fascists can just wreck it, right? They just wreck the council, so they need defense, so the fascists don't wreck it. Well, then they might just, eventually not have any impetus to be able to get anything done. They don't have money, and they don't know about what's happening in the world around them. So then they don't have the ability to act to a significant degree, because they don't have the ability to invest anything and to create infrastructure that might be needed. And they don't know about the outside world enough, which is to say they don't know enough about how the enemy is moving to make strong decisions with those councils. So you really do need all 4. They don't have to be in the exact same structure, but every community needs to have all 4 to be able to do anything significant. Anyway, moving on. Let's see here. Bellador asks, would you ever consider talking with Richard Wolff? I made my way to anarchism through him, and he seems to be a very honest interlocutor. Absolutely. I would love to talk with Richard Wolff. I think me and him probably disagree on some things, but as you say, he is obviously an honest communicator. Richard wants to convey himself clearly. He does not want to, play any games. He's not trying to just, look for gotcha moments. He's not rage baiting. He's a very intelligent man. And we'd probably have a great conversation. And I'd love to explore disagreements or agreements that we've had. I know that Richard has already spoken to, for example, the Moneyless Society, spoke with Zachary Marlowe, and they had a great conversation. So yeah, I'd love to talk with Richard if he wanted to talk. I don't know if he has like a podcast or something. I don't really do interviews on my channel, so that wouldn't be a good platform for it. But sure, if that came to be. Michael Piotrowski says, how do you feel about the current state of anarchism compared to 10 or 20 years ago? Looks like progress, or is the tendency losing influence? No, it's definitely progress. I think the anarchism not only has more adherents now, but we're seeing more social anarchists overall. And I think that it's the more social anarchists we see, the more that we will see anarchism gain power in the political sphere. And I mean to say that it will actually be able to do things and change things. I think that a movement towards social anarchism has been taking place since about 2011, and it has only been a positive thing. I think that we languished far too long in an individualist anarchism, which really led to lifestyleism and protest cycles and shrinking affinity groups that just got smaller and smaller and smaller and really never did anything to change society.
So I'm happy to say that we're seeing a return to social anarchism as people are really trying to return to changing society. There is a resurgence of revolutionary sentiment, whereas revolution, the concept of having a revolution, was pretty well abandoned by the anarchist movement for several decades. And so these are all heartening things. However, at the same time, you can see that other tendencies, other radical tendencies are growing, and that is not necessarily a positive. So yeah, I think things are looking good on that, in that sense. Yeah, Golan T says, yes, they did ban pro-Palestine protests. And yes, Anark, for the back to school this year, the government did ban so-called religious clothing. It has made an outrage in the media. Yeah, rightfully so. That's outrageous. I mean, it's dark. We're moving into dark times, people. Things are not about to get a whole lot better. I think they're going to get a lot worse before they start getting better. The only thing that's going to change anything is if people begin to act. If anarchists, libertarian, socialists, people who, advocate a horizontal mentality, a horizontal method, begin to actually do the work to build something that can change the world, because it ain't going to change in the right direction otherwise. Things aren't looking good in that sense. Rune asks, have you listened to pan-anarchist Keith Preston or read some of his books? Any thoughts regarding pan-anarchism? In my experience, pan-anarchism just means somebody who is trying to fold anarcho-capitalism or American libertarianism into the anarchist movement. So I consider, I haven't seen any exceptions. Anybody who has called themselves a pan-anarchist that I've seen is just somebody trying to group ANCAPs into anarchism. So I completely oppose that. If that is what is meant by pan-anarchism here, I do not think pan-anarchism should be understood as an anarchist tendency. If anything, it should be understood as a tendency to co-opt anarchism and to try to water down its anti-capitalist sentiment with the enemy ideology, which is to say capitalism. Capitalism is an enemy ideology to anarchism, and anarcho-capitalism is essentially a method to infiltrate anarchism with hierarchical ideology. Let's see here. Recommendations for anarchist theory discussing cities, urbanism, and architecture. I'm familiar with solarpunk, but I was wondering if you know any other resources. You should probably read Bookchin. Bookchin has written quite a bit on this. I'm trying to remember what the name of his major work was. What was it? Bookchin, Cities, Not Urbanism, or what was it? Something like that. Urbanization Without Cities. There we go. Yeah, Urbanization Without Cities. I was really enjoying that. I haven't really finished it, but it was very interesting what I was reading, and it's right on that topic. So very, very important stuff. Also, Seeing Like a State has some commentary on that as well, although it's mostly critique. It doesn't really have any constructive things, but it is critique of the form of cities that we have formed as well. There's another one. I think James C. Scott did another one regarding cities, but anyway, yeah, those are the two big ones that I would recommend. Let's see here. Hot take, if I hated Jews, I would be a supporter of Israel. Well, that makes sense. There's a lot of fascists that support Israel. They think that it is a model ethno-state. So Paus, I think is how that's said, says, this one is unrelated to the current topic, but I was watching one of your past live streams in which you mentioned chaz being a failure of individualist anarchism. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah, it was structureless. It had no formal mechanisms for making decisions or coordinating things between people. It was essentially, individualist anarchism tends to think that if all you can do is destroy the standing hierarchies, that everything will fall into place, that people will just do the things, and then all the problems will just work themselves out, because now that people have been freed from the tyranny of hierarchical power structures, that they'll just do it right. Things like chaz are a direct refutation of that. There will always be power hoarders, and the tactics of power hoarders are effective tactics. There's a reason we live in a society where there are hierarchical power structures, and that's because those tactics of accumulating hierarchical power, they work. They work. That's why we're here. So thinking that all we have to do is just eliminate hierarchical power in some area, and then all at once, everything will naturally become horizontal. I think that that is a completely failed idea. It has failed many, many times. And it's also, got us to where we are now. That's how hierarchical power structures arose, because there wasn't wide enough coordination between horizontal powers. And so chaz chop, whatever you want to call it, it needed structure. It needed horizontal structure. They needed to have bodies wherein like formal decisions were being made and people agreed to act on those decisions, wherein there was accountability for people that were acting, rather than just everybody just do as thou wilt, that led to so many problems. It led to the death of two people. And that happened because there was no accountability for these little militia structures that had arisen, presuming themselves to be the defenders of chaz. It also was extremely disorganized. They basically just moved in with all the things they'd already been doing with a bunch of organizations, and they just did those in the spot. It ended up being a place where there was lots of celebration, which isn't bad. I'm not saying it's bad. Lots of concerts and dance parties and stuff like that. That's all, that's fine. But this is all that it amounted to. And that's because they didn't have robust horizontal coordination. So yeah, I think that social anarchism is desperately needed. And it kind of is what you would expect to see in a place like Seattle. Seattle is like, when they're anarchists, like I would say 80 to 90% of the time, they are individualist anarchists. So, here we got this example where they were given this test bed to try this idea of just do as thou will, and then boom, hierarchies began to form because they didn't create a formal structure to stop those hierarchies from forming. So anyway. Let's see some recommendations. Trying to catch up a little here. I see some mentions here about Russia and the USSR and their association with genocidal activity. The specific stuff regarding their interaction with Holocaust, ignoring 10 million civilians being killed. I'm not exactly sure what you're referencing with all of this. I assume you're talking about the Holodomor, but I'm not entirely sure what you're getting at here. Branding, anti-Semitism, Russophobia. Yeah, not sure where you're going with this. Maybe you could give me some clarification. Let's see here. Rowan says, sounds kind of like citizen state to me. What is the distinction between it and your idea of anarchism? I don't know what is meant by a citizen state, but anarchism is anti-state. The state is authoritarian and functions on domination. So that is to say that it is about the concentration of power. It is about holding power in a narrow group of hands, and it utilizes that power using domination, which is to say violence, threat of violence, and deception. So there is no such thing as a citizen state, is what I'm saying. Like, the concept of all of the citizens of a society making decisions together is literally the negation of the state. The state is the body by which the citizens are alienated from the ability to make decisions about the world that they live in. So if the citizens are making all the decisions, it's the exact diametric opposite of a state. So I don't know what is meant by this concept citizen state. What do you think about capitalists who refuse the title and instead hide behind the term free enterprise and think leftism is just central planning without market signals, that they just don't understand any of these things? Capitalism is not free enterprise. Capitalism, if anything, leads to the destruction of free enterprise. Capitalism is a system that tends towards monopolization. That is one of its, the key characteristics is that hierarchical power tends to concentrate. Okay. All other hierarchical powers see as a threat that they want to absorb or destroy. So in capitalism, you have a whole bunch of competing hierarchical power structures. They're all going to compete until a few of them just crowd out all of their competition by succeeding either through luck, through their own force of will, through their, the quality of their products. In one way or another, somebody is going to win, and therefore they're going to crowd out their competition. They're going to eat them up, they're going to consume them, or they're going to destroy them, and they're going to consume what's left over. So this is just how hierarchical power structures function. There is no such thing as capitalism, or I should say, the only capitalism which in any way allows free enterprise to exist is a capitalism which is highly regulated, which is, say, some form of like social democracy. And even then, it has very limited characteristics in that sense. So yeah. And then this idea that all leftism is central planning without market signals just shows they don't know anything about leftism. It shows they don't really know anything about the theory behind leftist ideology. Pawis says, the largest anarchist federation in my country keeps trying to make less anarchists vote. I feel like not voting isn't good for anarchism. It'll just make the leftist party have less votes. I mean, I've said numerous times, I just don't really think that it's important whether people do or do not vote. Like, both ways. It's just not important. So I don't think that anarchists should be spending a bunch of time trying to get people not to vote, but I also don't think that they should be spending any time trying to get people to vote. I think that anarchists should just be focusing on other things. All time used to get people to vote or not vote is wasted. That's what I think. I think there are much, much, much more important tasks at hand. So that's my view on that. I think that it's a waste of effort, a waste of energy. Mephistopheles says, one thing I hate about anti-anarchist propaganda is confusing coordination with centralism when they're not the same thing. Yeah, absolutely agreed. It's one of the most common misunderstandings that anybody has about anarchism is that anarchism means lack of coordination. They think that if you organize and coordinate, that is the same as centralizing power. They can't even conceive the decentralization of power, which is very unusual. Like if you start talking to them about direct democracy, immediately they start to understand this is not true, but then they have a bunch of other criticisms, criticisms that are taught to us in classrooms about why direct democracy is bad. But yeah, it's a very unusual incongruence of thought. And part of me thinks that it is a thought terminating cliche that they all engage in so they don't have to really entertain the concept that we could devolve power down into horizontal power structures. Let's see here. Abimuku says, do you listen to Lorenzo's podcast? No, but not because I don't want to hear what Lorenzo has to say, but I don't really listen to any podcasts. That being said, I've definitely been considering listening to their podcast lately. So I might be doing so. I thank you for reminding me, actually. Let's see here. Isidro says, I love the work you're doing. Keep crushing it. Quick question. Are other anarchist channels I assume that's any other anarchist channels you would recommend. I'm a truck driver. I spend a lot of time on the road. Yes. In fact, I think last time I tried to do this, so I'm going to try to do it again. First, I just want to say the two that immediately come to mind, Zoe Baker. Okay, because I actually missed her on the list last time. I can't believe I forgot Zoe Baker. Zoe Baker, very important. Zoe is probably the most preeminent living historian of anarchism, and that's not to discredit any of the other historians. Then you got St. Andrew, or Andrewism, as the channel is now known. Andrewism is great. I've seen Andrewism rise from a channel that had less than 1,000 subscribers to now being way bigger than my channel. God, there's so many. Alki historian, that's ALKI. Let's see, you're Down the Rabbit Hole with Ketza is a new channel that just started, but I hope to see a bunch more content from them. Homebrew Futures. God, every time I do this, I know I'm leaving people out. Give me just a second. Anansi's Library. Let's see. They just released a new video very recently. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to remember all these. I always forget some, and I'm always upset at myself for forgetting the channels that are on this list. You can go watch a Moneyless Society as well. Now, they don't really explicitly identify as anarchists, but I think if you listen to them for long enough, you'll see that they are very anarchist adjacent. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind. Thought Slime is also an anarchist, although Thought Slime doesn't speak as much explicitly about anarchism these days, but Thought Slime. Yeah. These are the ones that immediately come to mind. I'm sure I'm leaving out too many channels. Too many, but there we go. Let's see here. Rowan says people enforcing laws. I assume that's what you're describing the citizen state as being, but like that is not, I would not call that a state necessarily. I think there would have to be a lot more clarification of what is meant by that, because that could just be another way of describing anarchism. But Alex Masco says, just wanted to say that your approach to anarchism and life as a libertarian has been unbelievably helpful in personal praxis and outlook as a local labor organizer. Best analysis on YouTube, hands down. I'm very glad to hear that. I strive to make my work practicable. I always make sure that I don't spend my time out in space talking about just the realm of ideas. Even though my work may seem very abstract to a lot of people, it is applicable. The things that I'm talking about are things that really do have, they are embodied in the real world, in the social structure, or the structures that we interact with and can construct. So I'm really glad to hear that you have found a way to apply a lot of the things that I've discussed here. Tobias says, hey bro, what are your ideas on C4SS and mutualism? I do not have the same politics as C4SS and mutualists. However, I see them as anarchists. And I think that they are often a very good entry place for people who were previously ANCAPs, and for lots of people who just really cannot imagine an end to a market dynamic. And so they often produce a very good bridge in that sense. That's the most I would really say. I think that I've liked some of the articles I've seen on there. I've disagreed with some of the articles I've seen on there. But overall, they're allies, even if I disagree with them sometimes. What is the role of anarchist media in the spread of anarchist ideas like anarchist news? I would say it has an important role, and it always has. And that is, it's essentially just spreading ideology. I mean, that's one of those four components I talked about earlier. There's individual conditioning, interpersonality, social structure, environmental structure. It creates that ideology portion. it helps radicalize individuals so that they can go on and create things within the other fields. So it's very important, and that's part of what I'm doing here on this channel. I do want to emphasize, of course, that by itself is not nearly enough. If all we all did was sit around and just do anarchist news and anarchist YouTube channels and anarchist podcasts, that would not be enough. However, it's a necessary part of the ecosystem, so people have got to do it. Let's see. What's up, my man? I'm glad I saw this on my feed, says Anarcho Purple. I'm glad you did as well. So they've clarified. I previously was like, I'm not sure what you were talking about. They said, I talked about Nazis killing over 10 million civilians during the occupation of USSR territories, and nobody even acknowledges this as genocide when every Westerner only talking about the Holocaust. So Nazis killed over 10 million civilians during the occupation of the USSR territories. Do you mean when the USSR held those territories the USSR later took? The USSR collaborated in that? I guess I just don't know enough about the specific details. Like, are you talking about when they had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact during that period of time? That I guess I'm just not clear about the specific time, place, event, etc. that you're discussing. Let's see here. Panos says, to be fair, individualist anarchism, despite its organizational flaws, I feel it does explore some areas that we as social anarchists might sometimes ignore. Yeah, that was my my thesis in part 2 of A Modern Anarchism. So I agree. Yeah, I think sometimes they emphasize issues that the social anarchists do essentially ignore. That being said, by itself, it's really not enough. I think that it's probably better for people to be social anarchists, but to read the individualist anarchists to understand where their blind spots might be. That's kind of my perspective. It's the reason I don't call myself a synthesist anarchist. I do think that we should be social anarchists, but we should be informed by the arguments of individualist anarchists at the same time. Tobias says, I write a book now about anarchism in Dutch. Ooh, it just went up. Dang. In Dutch, just for the fuck of it. I talk about both Kropotkin and Rothbard, etc. Just everyone. Yeah, I wouldn't include Rothbard personally, but understood. I'm glad you're writing. Natalie McNamara says, the area I'm living in is very lacking in any leftist organizations other than the DSA. Do you have any advice on finding others who would be interested in forming a libertarian socialist group? First, I would just recommend creating one. If you can even find one other person, just create one, and then create all the social media for it, and then host a reading group. In fact, you can host the reading group before you even find another person. Essentially decide what text you're going to read, create a reading group, create the social media for it, start reaching out to other groups, start advertising it, just try to get people in the room so that you can start talking about the ideas. And what you'll probably find is that as soon as you create the social media, you'll be surprised how many people are around that just didn't have a home for their beliefs. Also, don't necessarily join the DSA, but go be present in their meetings. You don't need to don't disrupt them necessarily. But if you go there, you might find that the DSA has sucked up a lot of those anarchist and libertarian socialists that didn't have a home. Invite them to come to the reading group. Don't go there just to poach the members, but you might find that there are more of those members or more anarchists and libertarian socialists there than you ever would have expected. So there's a lot more to say about this, but I don't want to spend too much time on this particular detail. I just want to say that this is the broad method that I would use. Eric says, hi, Anark. I love your content. I'm very glad to hear it. I appreciate you being here. Tobias says, this is the best anarchist site in my view. Well, I'm also glad to hear it. I appreciate it. Alex Masco says, question on the anarchist approach in UK. After getting to know the people involved in labor, community, and political organizing here, I'm not sure an asbestos platform is viable right now, sadly. That's possible, but the way I look at it is specificism doesn't need to go broad right off the bat. You really just want to make sure that you have a home for your most radical anarchist organizers. And if there need to be other organizations made that are homes for people who are not quite all the way there, then that's fine. But you really do need a place where you get the most radical anarchists and libertarians and socialists together to act in coordination. You know, don't try to imagine that the first thing you should be doing is trying to get everybody involved, because it's not necessarily the case that you need everybody involved right off the bat. First, you just want to make sure that you have the people who are most ideologically radical together. And then those people can act to spread the ideology, to widen the breadth of the group, to do what's called social insertion, which is what I described a minute ago with like DSA, for example. It's an important component. So yeah. And it should also be said that any group you create, you want it to have a libertarian socialist platform. You might be thinking to yourself, oh, that'll really limit who gets involved. That's fine. Organizers have a tendency to really try to emphasize organizing other organizers. They're like, oh, well, this organizer and that organizer don't have the same ideology, and 70% of people don't agree, so I don't want to have a platform organization because it'll exclude them. Who cares? You don't need everybody. Your job is not to organize organizers. Your job is to get the right people in the room so that you can go to the people, as we say, or as Malatesta says. You're trying to get the right people in the room and then go organize normal people. And you don't need them to join the organization. They can create council structures and neighborhood councils and so on their own with your assistance. But start trying to think about how to create that smaller group that then intervenes in many struggles. Don't try to think about how you just want to create a mass group where everybody, don't try to think of a specificism as being like, oh, we're going to get all of the people in this organization, or we're going to try to get a bunch of people in this organization. You may or may not, but you probably won't at first. Your purpose as in a specificist organization is to spread, it's to be the seed of this ideological conception, to let it grow everywhere. So that's what I would say. Also, it should be said, I think you already have platformists in the UK. I don't know. I think it's Solfed is what they're called. Yeah, I think it already exists there. But anyway, Anarcho Perp says, a long time ago, I think you once mentioned collabing with Entryism. Is that going to be a thing? Maybe, maybe not. We've talked about it on and off many times, so we'll see what happens. David K. Ginn says, Audible Anarchist has a great archive for earballs. Yes, agreed. That's another one I should have mentioned. There's anarchist audiobook channels as well. I should probably write a list of anarchist YouTubers. Yeah, probably. Eric says, quick question. Do you think that revolution can start in a society where working class people have a great level of life, like in social democracies? Yes. However, it's going to look different. I think that it can essentially be great. My computer's making noises now. Maybe I can mute that. There we go. Okay. Yes, I do. I think you might have sometimes remember that in all these situations, you're going to have to start small. So like it can be done in a social democracy, but you're going to have to find the people who are asking those questions. I guess what I would say is in all of these situations, I notice what y'all are going through is that you don't have a lot of allies around. And so you're thinking to yourself, maybe my conditions just aren't conducive. No, unfortunately, I think that's just true in most places. And one of the hard parts is finding your allies in these situations. And I think that in literally almost every single example, You really just need to start small, 1 or 2 people, yourself or one, and with maybe with one other person, create a reading group, invite people to the reading group, start going to other organizations' events, be present, but you don't necessarily need to join, just be present, offer your assistance, try to find if there are other anarchists or libertarian socialists that have joined those organizations, talk with them, try to get them to come to the reading group. Don't try to poach them, just try to get them to come to the reading group. And so you can all sit around and talk and discuss and then slowly try to grow that constituency. It's about getting the right people in the room. And this is true in every single context. So yes, I think it's, this is part of the reason why in part 3, I wrote this broad spanning, flow chart of revolution, because I do think that there are some universals that occur in a bunch of different circumstances that lead to revolution. And so, if you go watch part 3 of A Modern Anarchism, you'll see some of those universals. Zerka says, I actually found your channel through a recommendation on Andrew's stream. Well, I'm glad to hear it. David says, Renegade Cut. Yeah, I don't watch Renegade Cut, but yes, from what I've heard, they're good. Let's see. I'm trying to catch up again. Here I go. Apple's Pabble says, what do you think about anarchist schooling? Modern anarchists tend to ignore it, but in my experience, I think it has a lot of potential to spread anarchism and make consensus process a second nature. Yeah, no, it's excellent. It's just very hard to get it set up sometimes. You're really competing with a fully fleshed out school system. So you also have to teach to particular standards. Otherwise they're not going to be able to, pass certain national curriculum standards. They're not going to be able to end up getting a degree, say like their GED, if they don't know certain things. So, it would be very, very, very useful. In fact, I and a few others have thought about doing it before, but it is challenging. It's relatively large scale. So it's something that we have to do carefully, but I do think there's a lot of value in it. A lot of value. Reuven says, hi there. Can you lay out the difference between social insertion and entryism? Yes. The big difference is that, number one, entryism is like spy work. Okay. Entryism is trying to enter in order to just gather information, report back secretly, and to poach people, to damage the organization that you're entering into, to essentially join under false pretenses, and to wreck or to splinter or gather intel. That has literally nothing to do with social insertion. Social insertion is literally being present to help, empower the group in order to radicalize the group, in order to find your allies there and to see if there can be some cooperation. It's not attempting to subsume that organization, to destroy that organization. It's not treating them like an enemy. You're trying to essentially bolster all of the horizontal organizations that you can. You're trying to bolster your near allies. And so what that means is, you've got to be present, but that also means that in order to not appear as if you're being deceptive or you're trying to harm any organization, you need to be clear that you are from a particular organization when you are present. You need to say, I'm with this organization. Hey, everybody, I'm with blah, blah, blah. When you introduce yourself, you need to make clear that you are not there to, when it comes up or if it's ever pertinent, you're not there to sabotage. It's the opposite. You're there to empower and to offer resources and skills and knowledge insofar as that's possible. So social insertion is almost like the opposite of entryism. Where people go wrong is when they treat social insertion like entryism. You're not just there to gather intel. Okay. You're not there like a spy. You're there more like an ally who is giving of themselves and possibly creating connections between the organizations. Insofar as that it's appropriate, if they ask, for example, is anybody having any events this week? You would say, Yes, we're having this event or that event or this event. It's a way of instead of pulling back from the community, being active in the community, even in organizations that you may not have immediately thought would be allies or organizations that don't necessarily have the exact conducive politics to you. So even non-horizontalist but leftist organizations, I would say maybe the only exception is that don't do that with vanguards. Don't do that with authoritarian leftists. Mostly just because there's not going to be a whole lot of cooperation y'all can do. You're going to really butt heads in a significant way. But hopefully that was informative. Okay. Maja says, thank you for your work. It really helped me in so many ways. I'm very glad to hear that. Okay, so then they've clarified again. It's called General Plan Ost. Nazis occupied the USSR territories in 1941 and were intended to exterminate and enslave the Slavic population. Yeah, I've never even heard of that. So also I'm the member of the Russian wing of the International Workers Association. We tried to create our media platform now. Any tips on this? If you are doing YouTube, yeah, I could probably give you a bunch of tips, but I don't know if it would really depend on what you're trying to do with it, what kind of content you want to make. That it would have to be a longer conversation. If you'd like, you can DM me on Twitter, for example, and then I could talk with you a little bit about it. But, yeah, I mean, first is you just need to make the platform. You just need to make the YouTube channel or whatever. That's step number one. And then ask yourself what kind of content that it is you want to create. And then begin doing so on a consistent schedule. That's another part of it. But yeah, there's too many things for me to say. I can't summarize well here. But I'd be happy to help with the time that I have available. Eric Gray says, Black anarchist writing in general is some of the most important anarchist writing to read. Agreed. In fact, it's also some of the most modern anarchist writing. It looks like we're going to have ads here in a minute, everybody. But so, yeah, no, I think Black anarchist writing is often going to be some of the most modern anarchist writing. It's writing which actually takes into consideration all of the successes and failures of the last 100 years. And a lot of anarchist writing, unfortunately, has not, because it took place before those events. So Black anarchist writing is very modern and often has extremely valuable critiques about the presence of white supremacy and class reductionism within the anarchist movement and within other movements as well. So I think that Anarchism and the Black Revolution, probably one of the most important books that any anarchist could read in the modern day. Hassan Khan says, would you ever make a video debunking slanders against Makhno and the Makhnovist movement made by the Bolsheviks that the MLs believe today? I've been asked this one a few times, but the problem is that I don't want to get too bogged down in historical problems. The State is Counter-Revolutionary. You'll notice that's like the only series I ever did that was historical, right? That was about historic events. And that's because that's not really my area of expertise. My area of expertise is not history. It's theory, right? So, I could do one that's about that, and I could address specific claims, but it would require me to do quite a bit of research to counter those claims. I want to be a scrutinizing historian. I want to look at the first generation resources. I want to see, where every claim originates from. And then I want to contextualize it and all of that. That's a lot of effort, way more effort than, debunking theory pieces and so on. And also the Bolsheviks have really muddied everything so much because they published so much propaganda, so much deceptive rhetoric, that it can be very hard to even discern what of this is just the Bolsheviks making things up and what of this is the Bolsheviks reporting particular events that took place in a biased way. So that takes a lot of effort, more effort than can be done in just kind of like a short segment. It would require a lot of prep. I would have to read the pieces, then I would have to go read historic accounts, and that'd be a lot of effort. So, the answer is maybe, but it would not be one I would do anytime soon, probably. Let's see. I'm seeing like these message retracteds here. I'm not sure if they're deleting them or... Oh, there we go. Isidro says, it doesn't hurt to have a robust and clear argument about how voting is important. Speaking for myself, I know I've spent too much time believing in the myth of the power of voting. I probably will be doing a video about that. I'd been wanting to hold off until we were coming to like the election fervor. So, sometime in 2024 seems like a really good time for us to have a discussion about voting. And I know that it'll be a big topic then. People are going to be talking about voting or not voting and everything in between. Right now, we're kind of a little ways out from, that real fervor of the election season. So I figured we'd wait a little bit closer to that, and then we would have that discussion. But I absolutely will do a video about voting, what it does, can and cannot do, etc. Tobias asks, what's the difference between libertarian, socialist, and anarchist in your view? I don't see the difference. Anarchism is, I would say, a subset of libertarian socialism. Libertarian socialism is imagine Venn diagrams. Imagine we have a nested diagram, okay? The biggest circle is libertarian socialism. Then inside of that, you have anarchism, Marxist autonomism, neo-zapatismo, communalism. Like, the big circle is called libertarian socialism. And anarchism is one of those circles inside of libertarian socialism. So that's why it seems like there's not much difference. Anarchism is a kind of libertarian socialism, is what I would say. Do you think that material support for labor unions is a worthwhile endeavor? The DSA does a fair bit of that, and I'm considering participating. Yeah, it's probably worthwhile. Absolutely. That being said, what we should want to be doing is be creating horizontal labor unions. And unfortunately, a lot of the unions which exist are hierarchical. I do think it's valuable to support labor organizing regardless, but it should be said that the ideal is that we want to be creating new horizontal unions, because a lot of the major unions which exist are so liberalized, it is hard to stomach. However, labor organization in general is good, and if you want to do work supporting that, it's probably worthwhile. So yeah. Pin Archive says, thoughts on Earl of the Sood's ML cringe position that anarchism is fascist? He cites anarcho-individualist organs for Italian fascism. I mean, it's a completely laughable position. There is literally nothing to it. There are no anarcho-individualist origins for Italian fascism. Italian fascism's most notable origin is Mussolini, and Mussolini was a socialist, a failed socialist, essentially. In fact, Lenin praised Mussolini at one point, and that demonstrates who his actual closer allies were. The only origin I've ever found for a relation between fascism and anarchism was Sorel, who was an anarchist kind of broadly, but Sorel was not as influential as Mussolini, and he was certainly not influential to anarchists in the modern day. In fact, you'll never find Sorel being mentioned in almost any anarchist theorist of the time or beforehand. He wasn't very important. This in honesty, they're just trying to distance themselves from the fact that fascism actually has much more clear origins within an authoritarian left ideology. That's why, for example, Lenin praised Mussolini at one point. And yeah, no, their attempt to associate with anarchism with fascism is desperation. They realize that, as things are proceeding, as MAGA communism is brewing and getting bigger, and as authoritarian leftists are pipelining more and more people into fascism through red-brown pipelines, they realize that they have to play offense. They have to obscure and confuse people. And therefore, they want to associate people who are actually the literal diametric opposite of fascists, which is to say anarchists, with fascism. Because they are actually very close. And I think they are conscious of that. And so they are afraid of people making that connection. They've had a lot of connections. In the modern day, they still have a lot of connections. I wouldn't say that authoritarian leftism is fascist, but my God, there is a back and forth between them historically so much. You're just going to find so many people who previously identified as like state socialists who became fascists. A ton. So it's desperation. It's because anarchists are the true opposition to fascism. They're the literal diametric opposite of fascism. And so they realize that lots of people are probably going to be, because they're anti-fascist, they're going to be turning to anarchism, and they are trying to maintain their position there as having some kind of claim to supremacy within that anti-fascist framework, when in fact they are one of the most reliable pipelines to fascism. Not to say once again that they are fascist, but by God, they have quite a history of pipelining people to fascism. If you want to read about this, there is... Let's see, what's the name of the article? Red Brown. Yeah, you should go read an article called An Investigation into Red-Brown Alliances on libcom.org. I will actually even link it here in the chat. Yeah, this is a extremely well-documented connection. The Red-Brown pipeline is prolific and has taken place many, many times. So you can see any attempt to connect anarchism to fascism as being pure desperation. So anyway... All right. Whole Earth Community Autonomy Network says, any inspirational advice for high-functioning anarchist recluses or shut-ins attempting to organize in a community ignorant of anarchist ideals? Well, insofar as you're desiring to maintain that recluse or shut-in mentality, then probably you should do things like going and spreading pamphlets in places, like putting them out on counters. One thing that Scissortail did at one point is we created QR code stickers, and the QR codes led people to resources, to anarchist resources, to theory and things like that. Spreading that sort of like popular propaganda is probably a good way to go. You could obviously as well do stuff on the internet. Being a keyboard warrior is underrated to some degree. It actually does spread radical consciousness a lot of the time. So those things, insofar as that we have the antisocial among us, those things are probably going to be effective in a variety of circumstances. Benjamin Allison says, any resources for forming anarchist orgs in college and legal direct action we could do? Forming anarchist orgs in college is actually super easy. The idea I've described before of having a reading group, wow, that's going to be one of the ideal places to create a reading group. It'll be very easy to advertise as well. Just go put up posters on all the cork boards. You could even table out in the square in a bunch of different college campuses. They all have that similarity. You could just literally go advertise for your thing by sitting out there on a table, and you could make do the book sell and like buy some resources and resell them with a suggested price. Yeah, the college is actually an ideal place to do it. I think we kind of underutilize that resource. let's see here. And legal direct action, building radical organizations, building horizontal organizations. It's legal to do so. And it's direct action to construct those. But overall, generally, like, you're just looking at variations of it becoming more and more illegal the more direct the direct action is, but not always. You know, creating alternatives is a direct action, and it's not illegal to create alternatives. And it should be said, direct action does not just mean civil disobedience, okay, or disobedience broadly. I think a lot of people have just assumed direct action means getting out in the streets and throwing a Molotov cocktail or spray painting a wall, and it's like, yeah, I mean, those are forms of direct action, but they're actually less powerful than building powerful horizontal organizations. Reuven says, how do you handle people having you as a parasocial relationship? I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's very, very odd. I'm still getting used to it. I think one of the big things is that as the content creator, you end up having to figure out how to establish boundaries. Because when I first started doing this, I was extremely active. Anybody who sent me a DM, anybody who sent me a message, I would just answer it instantly. Now I have to purposely manage my energies a little bit better. But yeah, no, it's weird because I think sometimes I like that people, you know, see me as a friend and see me as someone they know and find me personable and so on. I think that that's fine. Other time, people really think that they deserve all of my attention, and that if I don't respond, it's like a slight or something, like an insult. And that is very weird to deal with, where, you know, people think that I'm like obligated to respond to them or obligated to send them messages and so on. And it's like, yo, I can't, if I sent you a response or a message, like, I took some time to do so, and I have a lot of people messaging me at all times on like a bunch of different platforms. There's like 6 different places I'm getting messages at all times. So it's kind of weird. And I could probably talk about it much, much, much more at length, but that's kind of my broad answer here. Oh, and by the way, if you like the work that I'm doing here on the channel, you should go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anark, ANARK. Really though, if you're a patron, I'm always going to try to respond to you. It doesn't mean that I'll do it promptly, but I will always respond to you if you're a patron, because like, damn, you're the reason I can pay the bills. Like, obviously I'm going to respond to you. But also people who become my patrons generally tend to be more insightful, more thoughtful, more careful in their analysis. If I haven't responded to you on Patreon, I apologize. I am forgetful. You could send me a message again, just reminding me, and I wouldn't be upset by that at all. I think that one of the big things you get out of the Patreon is that you have direct access to me and that I will respond to your messages. Also, people on the Discord, on the Anark Discord, I respond to them quite a bit more often. If you want to invite to that Discord, go become a patron, patreon.com/anark, you know, the whole spiel. But yeah. Anyway, let's see here. Benjamin Allison says, a second question: how do we help organize laborers and union members, specifically anarchist or specifically against capitalism, hierarchy, and not just for concession from capitalists or businesses? This has always been one of the hardest things for radicals or revolutionaries to do. People have a tendency to organize toward concessions, but when you organize toward just the concessions, well, as soon as you get the concession, all of your energy disappears. What you have to do is you have to organize people toward a goal that comes at the end of many concessions, right? You have to get them to think of a problem that's 50 concessions away, or think of a solution that's 50 concessions away, right? That's revolution. That's the purpose of revolution in the mindset here, is that you're asking for a complete transformation of society. And if you get concessions along the way, those just energize you now. But if you organize people towards just that concession, then when they get the concession, everything fizzles out. This is one of the problems of organizing towards social democracy. Because if you get the social democracy, everybody's like, oh, this is pretty cool. and then they're just like done and they just go back to their lives. No, you have to give people a demand that the system can never fulfill. And this is the job of the revolutionary. And if I had some easy answer to give you, I would give it to you, but there's not an easy answer. Every context is probably going to look a little bit different. You have to find those demands the system will never be able to fulfill. And then you have to push those demands permanently. You just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and they give you little concessions. They give you little breadcrumbs here and there, but you keep pushing until they give you the whole loaf. And, good examples of this were abolish ICE, abolish prisons, abolish borders. Those things, the state's never going to do those things. This is not to discourage anybody. The state's never going to do those things. Those goals are only achievable by abolishing the current form of society. Now, an example of something that is almost revolutionary, but probably could be achieved in the current system is Stop Cop City. You're going to create a lot of radicals in that process, but they probably can stop Cop City. Like, that can be done. This is not in any way to portray them as like lesser radicals or something. Once again, I think it's a very worthy cause. I've even said on stream before that it's like probably we should focus a ton on that cause, put a bunch of effort into stopping Cop City in Atlanta. But the system could just stop Cop City. Like, that could happen. And once that happens, people would probably celebrate and a lot of them would go home. Once again, this is not a criticism. But I hope that was insightful somehow. Let's see here. Anarcho Perp says, your answer to the question about Machno addressed this, but I think you're quite good at the historical content. I've always kind of wanted to state as counter-revolutionary about Vietnam. Yeah, I don't want to make it seem like I can't do the historical content. I just want to get it right, And I read so many sources for those videos that have a historic content that it can be kind of draining. And getting a bunch of sources, all of them with slightly different conceptions, taking different pieces of information to be true and so on. They are more draining than other kinds of videos. I'll say that much. But I'd be willing to do one. I'd be willing in a future sense to do more states counter-revolutionary videos. I don't think I'd be as likely to do like an Anark abridged or something about historic things because I don't want to speak off the cuff. I want to be sure that I've got every little detail correct when talking about history. This isn't really out in the realm of ideas. We're talking about things that really happened. So IDK Man says, what's your opinion on Hakeem, Ugopnik, and Second Thought? I think that Hakeem is an authoritarian leftist. Therefore, I don't really recommend people watch his channel. However, though, I understand a ton of his viewer base watches my channel. I can go look at my metrics and he's one of the most co-watched channels in my entire follower base. I find that kind of surprising given how anti-authoritarian leftist this channel is, but a lot of people who watch my channel also watch Hakeem. Ugopnik, I haven't watched enough of his channel to really say, but also strikes me as an authoritarian leftist. And Second Thought is like one of those where he strikes me as a very radical social democrat. I think he's much more accessible to people. And that's not really an offense to him because I don't really find him threatening. Once again, hopefully that's not offensive to him. And I know a ton of my viewer base watches Second Thought. And most of the time, Second Thought's just fine. Okay. Most of the time his channel's fine. Like, there's not an issue. But every once in a while he kind of interjects some sort of state socialism into the discussion that I don't think is very helpful. But in a general sense, Second Thought is kind of acting as the mouth of a big pipeline. And so I dislike that he presents that state socialist conception at all, because I think it is harmful to the movement for anybody to become a state socialist. I think that that's a dead end. It's already demonstrated. It's ineffective. It only creates capitalism. So yeah, I don't have any personal problems with any of them. Let's see here. Eric Gray says, in addition to Anarchism, the Black Revolution, I also recommend As Black as Resistance, Finding the Conditions for Liberation, and The Nation on No Map, Black Anarchism and Abolition. Yeah, I've heard good things about both of those. The one that I would be reading next is probably The Nation on No Map. I haven't got around to it yet, but that's one I've been considering reading. Let's see here. Thank you for the $2 donation, Grinning Guys. I appreciate it. I'm very poor, so anything any of y'all can do to help me with my finances is very appreciated. I barely make it every single month, so and the Patreon has not been growing this month. I'll note that. I've basically been getting almost no new patrons, which is a little distressing, but it happens sometimes. However, if you do want to help and you do have the available money to help, understand that, patrons are what make the channel run, right? If the Patreon were to fall apart, it would be very hard for me to continue doing the channel. So, growth on the Patreon equals me spending more time, being able to, work on the channel. There was a point where on the streams, when I would pitch the Patreon, I'd be like, I'd start doing more live streams. I start doing longer videos. I'd start doing them more regularly. All of those things have come to fruition now. Here I am doing a live stream. The videos are getting a little bit longer and a little more involved. You might notice there's a tiny bit more editing in the videos. Now notice that I do them every single week, with some exceptions, obviously. That all comes from the fact that I'm getting more patrons. So when y'all become a Patreon, it's not trivial. It leads to the channel becoming bigger. Also, it's telling me that ads are coming up. If eventually the time came when my Patreon fully supported me, I could have almost no ads on these videos, or like very few, maybe like a beginning and an end ad or something, right? But like, I'm barely making it by, so I need the money. I need like all of these small bits of income. That's the only thing that allows me to pay my bills. So if you want to one day see ads taken off of this channel, please go become a patron. It like makes a huge difference, okay? That's the spiel. I know you're all familiar with it at this point. Oh, dang, I was so far behind. I'm going to have to jump forward. Let's see. Rayon asks, what are your thoughts on anarchists' understanding of geopolitics, just in general, or from the anarchist media you read? Campus always accuses us of being pro-U.S. imperialism. Yeah, I mean, that's just a simplistic understanding. Anarchists want the liberation of all people everywhere, which means that ultimately they are in opposition to all states everywhere, right? So, that's not to say, for example, you can see that in the Israel-Palestine conflict, anarchists side with Palestine. They even recognize that Hamas is going to be some necessary actor in that process. They're not a big fan of Hamas, but they understand that Hamas is the underdog. So you see almost every anarchist is siding with the Palestinian resistance. But if Hamas were to take over Palestine and Israel were to be ousted and there were a two-state solution and Hamas was in power, you got to know that anarchists would be against Hamas then. They would want to see the abolition of both Israel and the Palestinian state. Anarchists are just more practical. Anarchists recognize that, hierarchical power is oppressive. It doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter what the conditions are. Hierarchical power is oppressive. You can look at lesser of two evils and you can say, which of these is less evil. For example, looking at Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine is clearly the lesser of two evils. So that's why a lot of anarchists side with Ukraine. They don't side with the Ukrainian state. You can see that in a ton of statements, but it's just like that situation with Hamas. Like clearly the underdog is Ukraine. Now it's a little bit different because the US is siding on different sides of this whole process, but anarchists are attempting to be objective. They're trying to be non-campist. So that's to say the authoritarians can't think complexly. America bad, anyone not America good. And therefore they just look at who America supports in any conflict and they just say that's the bad guy. Anarchists are actually thinking about the structure of the geopolitics. They're actually thinking about the structure of power. And so that means they're going to side one way here, another way here. It just differs, right? So I actually think the anarchists have a much stronger geopolitical structure, a much better understanding of how power structures function, the role of states in society. They have a much more utilitarian perspective. So let's see here. Panos says, in Greece, hierarchical trade unions, especially those controlled by MLs, are always dismissive of horizontal unions, always downplaying their value. Yeah, of course. Those are the things with actual revolutionary potential. MLs are almost always side with state capitalism and the capitalists. So what you'll find is that, they want those hierarchical trade unions and they'll fight against the current capitalist class. But when the time comes that the trade unions actually are able to seize power, they will want their vanguard to take over the state, and then they will abolish those trade unions. That's what they do almost every time they're given the chance. And then they will slowly reintroduce capitalism, but state capitalism under the control of their vanguard. So they always have the exact same approach. And their approach is co-option. They take the labor movement, they co-opt it, and then they make it serve state capitalism instead of regular old capitalism. So that's extremely predictable, but that's the reason why that, unfortunately, hierarchical unions are not as valuable as horizontal unions. This is the reason why MLs want them. Yeah, as Apple says, the vast majority of leftists who converted to fascism when it arose as an ideology were authoritarian. Yes, exactly. The majority, yes, most of them were state socialists. What do you think of calling authoritarian leftists right-wingers using the anti-hierarchy left-right divide? I don't agree. For me, left-right is an economic structure, or is economic, and it has to do with labor militancy and worker ownership of the means of production. So I don't call authoritarians right-wingers. To me, that's not really the correct understanding of the situation. Maja says, can you give us some good literature? Too much to name. I don't even know where I would conceivably start. But if you'd like to see the recommendations I've given before, I did a 4-part series. I think it was 4 parts. Was it 5 parts? I don't know. I did a recommended reading list. So if you go look at my Anark Abridged videos, you'll see that I have a big reading list, or I have a series of reading list videos. And I highly recommend you go watch those, because that's just literally what it's all about. Okay, I'm going to skip through a lot of this. Did you see the recent FBI info pamphlet about anarchist terrorism? Yes. I found it hilarious that even the FBI knows ANCAPs are not anarchists. They put them in a totally different section. They put them in the same section with fascists, which, good job, FBI. You have a single modicum of political analysis. Anarchists are not associated with ANCAPs. ANCAPs are associated with fascists. Let's see here. Anarcho-Perp says, patrons tend to be more thoughtful, more patient, better lovers, better smelling breath, prettier eyes, etc. You heard it here, everyone. In fact, if you just become a patron, all of those things will happen for you. That's what will happen if you become a patron to the Anark Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark. You will immediately be more thoughtful, more patient, a better lover. You'll have better smelling breath and prettier eyes. That's one of the rewards of being an Anark patron. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I mean, just saying. You heard it from Anarcho-Perp, so. Isidro says, do you have an Instagram account? I'd like to send you a DM. Unfortunately, I don't have a Twitter account. I don't have an Anark Instagram account. I'm also on Mastodon. I'm on Blue Sky. Yeah, you could send an email straight to that email I said earlier, baryonpipeline@gmail.com. You could also become a patron and then join the Discord, or you could send me a message through Patreon. Let's see here. Paulus asks, are you using Top Chat? I see that you don't read any questions that don't appear there. No, I'm not using Top Chat. I'm just really far behind and trying to kind of skip through questions that I've either already answered or questions or things that are just responses to other people. Tobias says, Anark is famous as Lady Gaga, etc. Yeah, it's a hard life, let me tell you. No. Benjamin Allison says, so individually and collectively, unions and its members have to be anarchists or libertarian socialists, making a constant effort in a revolutionary way rather than reformist. The second sentence, yes. People need to make a constant effort in a revolutionary way rather than reform. Otherwise, we're not going to get a revolution. As far as whether the unions and its members need to be anarchist or libertarian socialists for that to happen, not necessarily. There's actually been a ton of analysis on this. No, not necessarily. In fact, it's very unlikely you're going to get all of them to be anarchist and libertarian socialists. However, they do need to have a revolutionary orientation, and the unions themselves need to have a horizontal orientation. But you take what you can get and you work with the conditions you've got. So. Reuven says, I just asked about the parasocial relationship because I found it funny that this interaction verified that you actually exist. Like, to me, you were on the level of Harry Potter before that. That's weird and interesting. I'll take that as a compliment. I think that's a compliment. We'll just say it is. Let's see. The whole Rojava thing, do you think that is a successful anarchist project? I wouldn't consider it an anarchist project, and it's definitely got some things that I think are a little worrying about what might happen, but it should absolutely be supported. It is definitely one of the most horizontal, wide-spanning power structures you'll ever find on Earth. I think the only competitor is probably the Zapatistas, but they are like 10 times larger than the Zapatistas. I think like 20 times larger, actually. But, yeah. Yay, I got another $2 from Ape Dragon. How would an anarchist military be structured? The closest I've ever gotten to laying that out is in my work Constructing the Revolution. It's essentially going to be that you're going to have a whole bunch of militias, which will be horizontal. They'll vote about any sort of internal structure that's going to take place. And then you're going to have confederations of militias, wherein the militias as a confederation vote about the structure of the confederation itself. This has actually been done in a bunch of examples. It happened with the CNTFAI in Civil War Spain. It happened with the Free Territories of Ukraine. It has happened in almost every example of an anarchist military that you'll ever see. And it's been highly successful in a lot of them. In fact, Rojava was just mentioned. Rojava has a very similar structure. The only difference is Rojava actually does have a sort of state military command. But the militias, the confederations of militias, usually make decisions as nearly autonomous entities based on information they've been given. So that's the best summary I can give you, but I think there's a little more detail in Constructing the Revolution. And then there's also a little bit of detail in After the Revolution. Let's see here. Do you know what global anarchist and libertarian socialist sentiment has been on Australia's voice to Parliament? Literally no idea at all. Anarcho-Perp asks, how do you feel about the concept of the three-way fight? As in the idea that we are opposed to the state and to right-wing radicals, but they are also separate factions opposed to each other. Yeah, there's some truth to that. I would say that that's accurate in some ways and not in others. But yeah, no, I'd have to give that a much more thorough analysis. I don't think I've got time necessarily here, but Mephistopheles says, question, what do you think about military history? I ask because even though I'm an anarchist, it's a subject that interests me, and I've seen that in left-wing circles it's viewed with sus. I just assume you mean that it's like suspect. I think it's probably good to study military history, but it's understandable. Like, military history is like definitely one of those things that right-wingers tend to focus on, you know, definitely like one of those giveaways for being a right-winger is that you're like really, really into military history. But no, it's like valuable to know military history, to know how it functions, know what can and cannot happen and so on. You know, that's, I'd say study it. Just don't make it your whole personality. Somebody says, second thought is a tanky, but he hides it very well. Second thought is a leftist unity guy. Yeah, sounds about right. What are thoughts on signing treaties with indigenous peoples from an anarchist perspective? Should there be a stateless equivalent to treaties between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples? You know, that one's so hard to answer because the conditions of what would take place if there were ever decolonization of vast tracts of land is so hard to predict that it's hard to even say what our reasoning would be, right? Like which conception of decolonization would be taking place? Like, are we talking about the version where all of the tribal states take over and we just have a bunch of state structures? Yeah, anarchists would probably want to sign treaties between autonomous territories and those state structures. Are we talking about a full decolonization perspective where we have eliminated the state and capitalism and returned all land to the commons? Then you wouldn't necessarily need to write treaties, although maybe you would with specific tribes as new structures as they may stand. It's just, this is kind of another one of these things that lies too much in the realm of abstraction. We don't know what the conditions would be, so it's hard for us to say what the agreements or treaties would look like. Would it even be necessary? You know, it really depends on how the decolonization process would take place. So, no, that's, once again, like with the last one that asked a similar question, almost seems like a cop-out, but it's not. It's just like almost impossible for us to say what those conditions would look like. Let's see here. Continuing on. Second thought recently ranted on Twitter about authoritarianism not being a real thing. Yeah, the classic denialism. He should watch my video on authority or you know, the bunch, just really any critique of that. Infrared is one of the worst. Infrared is absolutely he is probably the most prominent creator of a red-brown pipeline. Infrared is the closest we've got to like a Strasserite. Like, you know, I usually don't call authoritarian leftists fascists, but damn, he's like 3 inches away from being a fascist. Like, the stuff he says on his Twitter and on his channel, he's dangerous. He is definitely bringing his following towards fascist beliefs. See, I've got another $5 super chat here. He says, good to catch the live stream. Thanks for your work, Anark. And I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you donating money. Every little bit helps. You know, y'all have basically paid for me to have an extra meal this week, which is pretty cool. So I appreciate y'all being here. I appreciate the super chats. All of this is helpful. Let's see if I can find my place back up here in the chat. Let's see. Trying to catch up. Tobias says, so both Israel and Palestine can fuck off. I was like, no, I just like to emphasize it's not that both Israel and Palestine can fuck off. It's that the Israeli state and any state created by Palestine are probably both, they're just both going to be oppressive entities. But that doesn't mean that the Palestinians are not going to be obviously in the right and trying to throw off the fetters of Israel. So I just want to emphasize that, you know, a Palestinian state is not the Palestinian people. It's very important to make that distinction. Thoughts on siding with Palestinian Marxist-Leninists? Probably just going to end up happening insofar as that we say that Palestine should liberate itself and undergo a decolonial struggle. Probably just what's going to happen. When you say that you support the Palestinian people overthrowing, you know, the system of apartheid, then you're just saying that you support those entities. It's not to say you support everything they do, but it kind of just boils down to you saying that, you know, you support the decolonial struggle, and Marxist-Leninists are part of that decolonial struggle, as are anarchists, as are people that have ostensibly social democratic politics, as are people who have ostensibly basically fascist politics or ethno-nationalist politics or liberal politics or any of those. So those are all just going to be involved in that decolonial coalition. I think people should read Wretched of the Earth. I think it would give people a much better understanding. But the Marxists call that anti-imperialism. When you're not America, then you're good. Yes, that's exactly what they think it is. Let's see. Okay, God, I gotta catch up here. I gotta catch up. Okay. Okay. I'm just reading through these, even trying to figure out which of these. Okay. Reuven says, it was a compliment. Not all people are allowed to exist. Trans cuties, for example. Anyways, except for historical reasons, is there a theoretical difference between abolitionism and anarchism? Honestly, a lot of people have pointed out that there's a huge amount of overlap, and probably a lot of people who consider themselves abolitionists don't recognize that the natural outcome of their politics is anarchist. They probably just don't know enough about anarchism a lot of the time to really discern between the two. Met a lot of people who consider themselves abolitionists. Then when I talk to them about the sort of alternative systems they would like to be in place, they kind of end up laying out anarchism. And so I think a lot of abolitionists would be very receptive to anarchism if they could sort of be educated about what anarchism actually is. I think a lot of them are like, you know, associate anarchism with just like riots and street and protests and street politics and all of that. But if they could understand that anarchism is also kind of like a political theoretic body of work, and that that actually entails building certain kinds of structures that would be the alternative to current structures, probably a lot of abolitionists are anarchists in waiting. Let's see here. Yeah, Israel is a settler colonial society. Israelis are in the wrong. Yeah, I mean, pretty much settles it. Or at least Israel, the state of Israel, is in the wrong. And then it gets more complicated when you talk about the Israeli people themselves. Who do you think is going to win the 2024 election, Trump or Biden? What is going to be the potential effects of Trump winning the election? Honestly, I'm getting the feeling that it's going to be Biden, but I think that making predictions is probably just not the right way to go. It's really hard to tell because so many little factors could make a huge difference. But I do feel like Trump has lost a huge amount of his constituency for reasons that are not good, mostly because they think that he's not radical enough. But you know, you're probably right to say that he would go head to head with Biden, but also man is in court and starting to be in court for so many different felony counts that it's getting kind of ridiculous. Like his whole life is about to get fucked up. And he is going to be constantly in court. He's already about to be constantly in court. And he hasn't even seen the bulk of all of the court sentences or the court dates that he's going to have to begin attending. So it's going to be hard for him to even run in a practical sense. And Biden is just that, lesser of two evils vote for a lot of people. A lot of people are just going to vote for him because he's not Trump. And that's why he probably won to begin with. Let's see. Infrared Haas is definitely a tradcon fascist. Yeah, I mean, I can't really tell you you're wrong. If he's not literally a fascist, he's like fascist adjacent. He is the most significant red-brown pipeline in existence right now. Harrison asks, if they spawned every 60 seconds in front of you in an arena, how many 12-year-old Daniels could you beat in a fight? No weapons. And you get to go home if you beat 200. Okay. I mean, I guess really I'm just factoring in how long it would take to get tired. I think I could get to 200 maybe, but no, I mean, probably I'd get tired, I don't have that great of fitness, but 12-year-old Daniel was not very strong, so I think I could win quite a few times. We'll see though. Authoritarians hate the word authoritarian for the same reason racists hate the word racism, because it describes them. That is the correct assessment, Sapphire. That's precisely correct. Lil Molly says, happy spooky Friday. I don't know what to say in live. That was it. You did it. You said it right there. That was the right thing to say in live. Happy spooky Friday. Nailed it. Real Soldier Boy says, hey, I started watching your content this month and I'd like to thank you for the education. I am glad that you have benefited from it. Thank you for beginning to become a watcher of the channel and subscribing and all of that. It's much appreciated. Let's see. At the end of the day, whoever wins the 2024 election, the loser is the human species and this planet, so long as the state exists. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Obviously, Biden is the lesser of two evils, but if either win, we're screwed. I mean, or rather, the state is going downhill. Like things are bad. I don't know how to put it any other way. Things are bad. Biden is not even a social democrat. He's just a regular old liberal. And that is not enough for the current moment. We should, by historic standards, be in a period where we have at least started establishing social democracy in the face of fascism. But that's not happening. So let's see here. Ruckley says, right-wingers yelling about Joe Biden will abolish the police and open the borders for brown people, and anarchists sighing and saying, if only. Yeah, that's been my whole life, essentially, in politics, paying attention to the left-right politics or Democrat-Republican politics. Let's see here. Oh, I got another $5 here. I got Rayan again. Rayan says, Cornel West surprise presidency would be better than anything else. I mean, that would rule. Like, the man's not perfect, but damn, it would be pretty great to have Cornel West as president. I would not complain. I would not complain. Cornel West surprise presidency. Yeah, well, here's to hoping. Here on recommendation from Andrewism. Hell yeah, glad to have you here. Greetings from PA. I assume that's Pennsylvania. Welcome. Glad that you're here. Andrewism is fantastic. Thoughts on Jackson Hinkle? Basically the same as Hawes, just way less effective. I don't think many people are being convinced by Jackson Hinkle. I think that he mostly is just in that same sort of orbit with Hawes and with the other quote unquote MAGA fascists, or sorry, MAGA communists. Right. MAGA communists. Yes. They're pretty much just all in this little ecosphere together. And, it is highly damaging. They're all just kind of feeding off of each other's little red-brown pipeline. Harrison says, what's something you've wanted to brag about, but you haven't had an excuse to recently? I've been published by a small outlet, Sedition Media. It's like this. See, look, let's see. I got to make sure it's in focus and everything. There it is. Yeah, you can see it. Seditionist Media. Boom. They published these copies of A Modern Anarchism Part 1. And look how pretty they are. Don't you want a copy? I mean, I say this like I'm like trying to make money off of it, but truthfully, I would barely make any money. I don't think I'm making any money off of these. But if you want to get one of these, you can go to Seditionist Media's website, and I've put that in the video description to a previous video. So let me get it pulled up real quick, and then I'll link it here. Boom. Okay, and then I'm pasting it right in the chat. Boom. There it is. If you want a copy of that for yourself, look how pretty it is. Isn't it pretty? Ah, so pretty. And then, oh, it's got like illustrations in some parts of it. Like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Look at that. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? See? Ooh, oh yeah. Anyway, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Really like the cover work that was done here. Who is a bigger goober, Infrared or Burger King Caleb Maupin? Who's a bigger goober? Caleb Maupin. But I think Caleb Maupin's also pretty dangerous in his own sense, although I think he's not as dangerous at this point. Even though, you know, he obviously was outed as being the head of a cult, Infrared still has a reputation somehow, and he has still got people duped by him. I saw a state socialist claiming anarchists can't define authoritarianism, and it was so obvious that they just didn't want to think of themselves as an authoritarian. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Like, it's funny how many times that it's been like defined to them, and there are like various definitions that work, and yet they just don't want to hear any of them. They don't want to hear any of them. Let's see. Do you think there are certain personalities that just predispose people toward authoritarian ideologies? If so, what would that mean? Their personality would have to change before their ideology? Maybe, you know, I think that people are institutionalized by authoritarianism. So that's to say that when you've been abused by an authoritarian for long enough, you have a tendency to believe that it's like eternal or absolutely necessary. Kind of like how a person becomes institutionalized in prison, or how abuse victims just grow to accept their abuse. I call it hierarchical realism in my work. This idea that authoritarianism or hierarchical power is the only way that things can ever be. And it's not only peddled by the right, it's peddled by authoritarians on the left. And so, yeah, I think that people who have been very damaged by hierarchy often end up being people that are going to try to create hierarchy. And that is really unfortunate, really unfortunate. But as for like personality types, I don't know. I could never tell you what amount of somebody comes from nature and what amount comes from nurture. So Benjamin Allison says, what's your road cycling routine, or is it just transportation? I haven't had a routine in a while. I bought that bike back in college, but I still have it just because I want to have a bike. And I've rode it from time to time, like when my friends want to go out riding or something. Unfortunately around here, it's not great transportation because everything is car infrastructure here in Tulsa. Excuse me. IDK Man says, I think I was a bit of a tanky before I watched The State is Counter-Revolutionary, so thank you for changing my mind. I never found any content countering them that was in any way left. I assume you may mean you didn't find any content countering The State is Counter-Revolutionary. Yeah, no, I mean, several people have claimed that they're going to produce a counter to it, but they never do. Most of the time, all they do is they leave kind of bitchy comments underneath, and I respond to them, and it's obvious that what was really going on is they just don't want to accept any of it. So the sorts of people who say that they weren't convinced by it and they still support state socialism, when I really probe, what I realize is that they were never going to accept it because the actual facts and arguments don't matter to them. They have an emotional connection. They are siding with it because it's there's a sort of inertia to change, an inertia to really updating their beliefs about the world. So I'm very doubtful that anybody will be able to produce a coherent rebuttal to it, because it is the rebuttal of everything they've been saying. I produced The State is Counter-Revolutionary after arguing with authoritarian leftists for like 2 years straight. So I heard every single argument they could produce. I produced many of the sources that are in that video directly to them and asked them to refute them, and they couldn't. They just kept coming up with silly little fiddly arguments here and there. Well, what about this little thing? And they used the wrong word for this and blah, 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 blah. Like, they're not going to come up with a response because I developed the script for The State is Counter-Revolutionary by exhausting all of their possible responses. So unless they want to make something up or they want to produce an argument that no authoritarian leftist was able to produce for like 2 years of me arguing with them on Twitter, then yeah, they're not going to have a rebuttal. They're not going to have a rebuttal. There isn't a rebuttal to that series. At best, there are minor nitpicks, like little things I said here and there that were not quite right. And I've tried to correct those as best as possible in the comments, but nothing that undermines the central thesis of the series. Let's see, trying to catch up. I should mention, because I see people responding to the book pitch here, it's only part 1 of A Modern Anarchism, okay? But they will eventually be publishing like part 2 and 3 and so on, and then 4 once it's done. So the Whole Earth Community Autonomy Network asks, do you think the Cornell West independent run could facilitate mass movement building? Maybe. But I have not seen any proof that there is a mass movement behind Cornell West right now. There's not a huge amount of energy for his campaign. Now, that might change once people get on the debate stage, and I would be happy to see a movement arise behind Cornell West. And I would also suggest that anarchists do some social insertion if that were the case. But I'll believe it when I see it. Because Bernie, I think one of the big things that Bernie had such a long history there, being a politician, that he'd been getting approval and a growing number of people behind him ever since like Occupy. I first started Bernie in Occupy. So we'll see if Cornell can get a similar mass movement behind him. If so, it will probably be a good thing. Let's see here. Panstorm says, in your opinion, what could be the explanation for the incel phenomenon? I mean, it's obvious. It obviously only cannot be explained by lack of sex or something like that. I mean, shockingly, I think it is semi-simple, and that's just that all of our third spaces, all of the places where we used to meet people, where we could organically find new people to know and therefore to make relationships with, they're just all destroyed. They're all destroyed. Like they've been destroying them for now, like 80 years. And so now, of course, everybody's isolated. Everybody's atomized. It used to be that, oh, okay, you were a bit of a homebody, but you were also like still seeing people regularly in these third spaces. You were still meeting people regularly. And so a lot of these people who maybe aren't like, the peak exhibition of masculine qualities still could have found somebody that would have been compatible with them. They wouldn't have been so lonely. It's like, not to say that there weren't always like incels in the sense, like involuntarily celibate people, but there was just a lot more of a community is the way it used to be. I think a lot of them as well, because they're such shut-ins, they are going to be very susceptible to extremist arguments about the women being the problem and all these reactionary beliefs about leftism being the problem and blah, blah, blah. And it makes them more undesirable. It makes them more repulsive to not only women, but just really the average person, right? So it kind of digs them deeper and deeper and deeper into their hole of atomization, right? They were already separated because society, essentially the social fabric of society has fallen apart. But now they've taken on all of these beliefs that are so repulsive, they're even less likely to fix their problems. They're even less likely to ever find a partner now. I mean, numerous people have noted it's like these Andrew Tates and, of the world are essentially teaching men all of the exact wrong behaviors to find a partner. It's a reinforcing audience. It's an audience that is only going to get more repulsive the more they fall into the rabbit hole. And so then they're going to make up all kinds of things about, them being not too ugly to find a partner and blah, 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 blah. Most of the time you see these men who are incels, and so many of them just look normal. They're not hideously ugly. They just look normal. And there's nothing wrong with that. They would be able to find partners. Like, a bunch of them don't look so great, but they could probably clean themselves up. And they really, try to make it about everything but the real problems at hand, which is social atomization, the extreme sort of incel ideology, and this like red pill in nonsense and black pill nonsense that these things are actually preventing them from solving their own problems. So. Reuven says, what do you think about the skeptics movement? I feel like this focus on conspiracy theories is a form of escapism. I think that the skeptic movement had a lot of things right insofar as that scientific skepticism is good, but I think that they really overestimated their ability to confront a variety of different kinds of problems. I think that the scientific skeptic movement really won the public debate between religion and science. And then what they thought was, oh, well, it's just going to be like that for every topic that we encounter. And it wasn't. They were these sort of fumbling morons when it came to every other topic they wanted to discuss. And the majority of them, and I'll say that flatly, ended up becoming anti-feminists and reactionaries and right-wingers, and ended up literally on the opposite side of so many issues they used to argue were indicative of religious beliefs. They themselves became homophobes. They themselves became reactionaries of various kinds. and supporters of suppression and popular movements, those things they all used to accuse religion of doing, you know, but they came to those same conclusions just by being reactionary and thinking that their skeptic beliefs could take them all the way. And they didn't. They didn't. However, one of the tragedies is that they really did a huge disservice, because scientific skepticism would be, you know, super helpful right now in debunking conspiracy theories. And there was a contingent of the movement who had already done a lot of work trying to debunk conspiracy theories and to give people valuable tools that could allow them to spot conspiracy theories well before they ever spread wide. But because the skeptic movement was so reactionary, unfortunately, so many of them, they really made it to where now those tools are not widely understood. That a lot of those you know, rational structures of forming belief, those didn't get popularized because they chose to become reactionaries instead. So that's extremely disappointing, because now conspiracy theories have spread wide and they are doing extreme damage. It used to be that conspiracy theories were only believed by a small contingent of the population, and that was because everybody would laugh them out of the room. But now conspiracy theories are believed by huge swaths of the population. You know, QAnon got enormous. And it's like, obviously some amount of that scientific skepticism, of that skeptical rationality needs to return, but obviously with none of the baggage of that skeptic movement beforehand. And I'm certainly not going to be the person to do that. However, it's unfortunate. They really shot themselves in the foot in that sense. Born Sinner says, do you think anarchism has the ability to eliminate gender roles or delegitimize rigid gender hierarchies? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think it was kind of starting to do that well before we've ever even had, you know, feminist literature that talked to us about gender as performance. You can actually see that anarchists were beginning to offer a sort of a gender abolitionist perspective very early on. However, it didn't spread wide enough, in my opinion. I think that anarchists, unfortunately, still maintained some very patriarchal tendencies and did not question gender nearly widely enough. So I think that anarchism goes hand in hand with delegitimizing rigid gender hierarchies. But we still have work to do. I think we're in a much better place than we once were. Ruckley says, I want you to know how much I've enjoyed your video essays. You and Entryism have been the creators that have most challenged and expanded my thinking and awareness. I really appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you being here and watching the content. I don't know if you've only watched those Anark abridged videos or not, or, you know, the Anark response videos or whatever, but I'd really like to encourage you to go watch the video essays. And that's true for any of you here. You know, the video essays are where I put the majority of my work. And I consider them to be the work that hopefully will leave some kind of lasting legacy. So please go watch those. A Modern Anarchism is the one I'm currently working on, part 4, and then that will be the end of the series, and I'll be moving on to new video essays. But those video essays are really the most important content I produce here, I think. So I appreciate you watching. Tobias says, I watch Infrared. I watch his stuff, and he is angry all the time. The guy is always angry. Yeah, 100%. He is. He's always angry. 100% of the time. It's like impossible. Like watching him makes my blood pressure go up. Pin archives. I had a gaggle of MLs on Twitter laugh at me for citing fascism and auto rule for my understanding of fascism the other day. Yeah, because they're just so simple-minded that anything that disagrees with them, they're just going to think is like silly and childish. They have a one-dimensional view of the entire world, and that is, did authoritarian left thinker say it? It true. And that's it. That's like the entirety of their analysis. It not US, it good. It's like Neanderthal thinking. Oh God, I'm scrolling up. Somebody says, just joining. How far behind is he? Really far behind. I've got to, okay. I'm going to move forward. Do you play a musical instrument? I don't. Music recommendations. I don't know off the top of my head. That's hard. Proto Martyr, Parquet Courts. Parquet Courts, Total Football is really good. Next. Opinions on our changing climate. Haven't watched enough of their channel to say anything. Let's see. Mife Kinfi says, hello from Vietnam. I'm here to learn more about anarchism, but in my country, it's kind of risky to talk about this topic because every indication that the state is opposed will not end well. Well, I appreciate you being here, and I hope you learned something. I'm not sure if this live stream will be the best place for you to learn a whole lot about anarchism, but there are other videos on my channel that I think would be very helpful for you. I think the one, if you have some kind of like theoretical foundation, you should watch A Modern Anarchism and go in order, parts 1, 2, and 3. I think you'll learn a lot in that process. So I appreciate having you. I'm glad to have somebody from Vietnam watching my work. Let's see. Have you watched Entryism's newest video on third spaces? Yes, and it's fantastic. Okay. I'm trying to catch up. I'm sorry if I'm skipping your questions. Alexander 5 asks the important question. How often do you shave? I don't know. When you are maintaining a beard, you kind of just like shave here and there depending on what's needed. So like I just shaved yesterday, but all I did was shave my neck and then form the beard. But then another day I may just trim my mustache. You know, it's like, it's not like I have a routine. It's more just like I look at my beard and I'm like, oh, it needs this. Oh, this looks weird. Oh, that just seems too long. Oh my, you know, like, and you're kind of always like reforming it into the shape you like. So I don't like, have some routine. Ruckley says, I think incels are also a byproduct of hegemonic masculinity. If manhood is a competition, there will be men who lose or see themselves as losers. Yes, absolutely. Obviously, patriarchy is definitely involved. However, I think you'll find that there was, before the destruction of third spaces, before we were incredibly atomized, you still had patriarchy, but you did not have this incel movement, Obviously, it could be said that women being liberated from the household and being no longer held to the subjugation of male control probably made it way harder for men to find spouses, and therefore now they have to actually do the work and they have to actually be a desirable partner instead of like society just defaulting to them, deserving a wife or something. And so, yeah, that's also part of the operation here. Women now have the dignity of choosing their partners and not being required to find a partner in order to exist. And that means that them no longer being coerced into this relation, men now can't just guarantee that they're going to find a partner. So that probably means that, plus the atomization, plus the ideology, the incel ideology really makes some of these men just gonna, sink into this terrible depressive state where they're damaged to everyone else as well. So let's see. Oh my gosh, I'm almost caught up. Alexander 5 had a great point. His beard is great. Thank you. It's looking real good right now, I think. Let's see. Samir Duran says, Dear Anark, thank you so much for being out in the open and direct about your beliefs. You're welcome. I'm not sure what exact thing that was in reference to, but I try to be. Sometimes it rubs people the wrong way, but I try to be open and honest about what I believe. Let's see here. Next. Samir Duran says, currently trying to get in touch with anarchists in the UK and seem to only find some sort of evidence avoidance when it comes to my direct speech about wanting to join a movement. Am I being too direct? I mean, it's possible that the way that you're phrasing it to them, it seems like suspect, only because maybe they are used to people speaking in a very particular way. So, you know, one of the problems with the movement these days is that everybody's like really paranoid. We're always really paranoid. Like if somebody doesn't use the right language or they say things in a weird way, in a way we're not familiar with, you know, like newbies tend to do, then people get really suspect. Like, oh no, are they infiltrators? Is that like the government trying to, you know, and so on and so on. And then they're like, oh, that language, you know, they don't have the in-group language. And so they might be overly skeptical in that sense. So, unfortunately, I'm not really sure how you could fix that other than, you know, just keep being honest about, the way you approach these and, maybe be specific rather than just saying you wanted to join the movement. Say that you're what things that you think need to be done in the world, right? Give them a little more clear demonstration of what you think is wrong and what you think needs to be solved. Nariki says, very important question. How are you? I'm all right. Like, it's like, yesterday we got news that a very important organizer here in town committed suicide. And, that has been very difficult for everybody. Different people have been dealing with it in different ways. I was not super close to them, but they were very important here in town. So I'm certainly not like jubilant. I'm not in like a super great mood, you know, it's very depressing. But I'm like holding up pretty okay. People are kind of coming together, hoping to support their kids. Their name was Fern. They were, they were probably the main organizer for a group called the Tulsa Intersectional Care Network, which was very important in providing harm reduction for queer people here in town. And their absence will leave an enormous hole in the organizing scene here in Tulsa. So that's on my mind, you know? But I guess that's the overly serious answer to your question. Anyway, let's catch up. Janik Goth says, hello, I'm your biggest fan. I'm glad to hear it. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you being here. Loy says, did liberalism create fascism? Like in an indirect way, kind of. Yeah, because it, you know, it was so ineffectual, but not in a direct way. No. Fascism really arose because of the failures of liberalism. It rose from the contingent of state socialists being susceptible to nationalist and xenophobic propaganda. And yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't say in any direct sense liberalism created fascism. Magnus says, usually I'm not affected that much by events around the world, but what's happening in Palestine is affecting me a lot. How do you usually deal with it? Ignoring it feels wrong. Don't ignore anything. However, my perspective is maybe kind of stoic, and that is to separate what you can and cannot control, right? Understand that you should try not to suffer over that which you do not control. Not to say that you don't recognize the horror of it, and not to say that you don't try to find a way to control those things, to exert some sort of influence over them. But if you recognize you have no control over it, don't dwell in your suffering. It's sort of pointless. Only suffer for as long as you learn something from it. If you have stopped learning from your suffering, don't dwell in it. Don't wallow in it. It's not benefiting you anymore. You know, Buddhists talk about not suffering twice, right? You know, they separate the difference between pain and suffering. So, you know, pain is inevitable, right? You know, you get burnt or you get bit or something, you know, and that's painful, and you can't avoid the pain. The pain is just a natural response, but you can not dwell on it. You cannot suffer afterwards, right? The longer you dwell on the pain, the more you extend the life of the pain. And so what I've tried to do in my life is tried to separate what I do and do not have control over. Therefore, try not to suffer twice, I guess, as you might say, but also to extend the amount of things that I do have control over, the sort of influence I have in the world, and then to act in the world. I think that a lot of people suffer from seeing the horror around them, and that they would suffer less if they were doing something so that they could assure themselves they're doing the most they can. Okay? When you're doing the most you can, you're going to hurt a lot less, or you're going to suffer a lot less, because you're going to know, hey, I did the absolute most that I could in the world. I'm trying my hardest to change things. And if that hasn't worked, you know, I can only work as hard as I can work, and I can only do as much as I can do. And without that, I think that we suffer with our guilt. We suffer with our feelings of impotence. But when you act, you can at least reassure yourself. You don't need to feel guilty. You're not impotent. You're acting. You just need to get more people with you to act in a larger sense. And I think this is what allows us to be revolutionary while not being utterly debilitated by misery. Because like I was just saying earlier in the stream, you know, we are living in a very, very dark time, and history will remember this as a very dark time. So I know that all of that is easier said than done, but it requires practice. It really does. It's something you're going to have to practice. It's not just going to come easily. Saying it isn't going to be enough to just do it, but you can do it. I believe in you. Lily says, how do you cut through the noise of capitalist and authoritarian biases and propaganda when researching the history of things like the Russian and Chinese revolutions? Yeah, that was really hard, actually. What I had to do was read various sources. So what you try to do, and this is just, some of this is just what they teach you in college. Some of this is what they teach history students. The best source is a source that experienced it directly or can demonstrate proof somehow. Okay. But if that source has an interest in it, then you need to question how they might be distorting that. So, in a general sense, it is not good to read, the hierarchical power structures account of what took place. Hierarchical power structures are based in deception, so they're going to deceive you. But then from there, you should probably read a variety of sources. So in the Chinese and the Russian contexts, I was reading all kinds of different things. I was reading liberals. I was reading anarchists. I was reading, you know, some authoritarian literature that was pertinent. I was reading, or I was trying to find firsthand sources, like direct accounts of things that took place. And some of the sources will cite those for you. And then you go to the sources they're citing and you read those. But you'll never be certain you got the whole story. That's just unfortunately the limitation of us as humans. I just did my best. That's all I can say. Let's see here. Okay. I'm trying to catch up. I've been asked, are you part of a labor union? I'm not. None of the work that I do has a union for it. Let's see here. Okay. Murillo says, obligatory question on Palestine. Any thoughts on a possible path for a no state solution? So I kind of answered this a little bit earlier. The only path would be if anarchists or libertarian socialists of some kind could begin building real, like, excuse me, horizontal power structures. Begin building neighborhood councils, begin building these structures down at the level of the people. Because remember that only ever happens from the bottom up. It never happens from the top down. Unfortunately, that just does not seem feasible. They live in rubble right now. Okay. Like they're being bombed into rubble. Now, there might be some room for those to be created to coordinate resources among people who are in a really bad place. Might I suggest that if you're an anarchist or libertarian socialist in Gaza right now, that you begin trying to figure out way to coordinate resources, to build those power structures, those democratic structures for people to make decisions together from the bottom up. But unfortunately, I think that's a little unlikely. And it's the reason why that we need to begin building structures well before ruptures ever happen. Because by the time ruptures happen, things are going to be so much harder to build. It's going to be so much harder to construct something. So what you need to do is have it constructed beforehand. You need to have it stress tested before the crises come. Because when the crises come, if you're not stress tested, you're just going to fall apart. So unfortunately, I think it's unlikely we will see a no state solution. It would be good, but it would require some kind of superhuman capabilities by Palestinian anarchists or libertarian socialists. So that's my perspective on it. Let's see here. Pippi says, "Hi, thank you for your work. I appreciate you being here, of course. Love from Belgium." Damn, Belgium. I got a good cross section tonight. I got a real international vibe going here. We got Belgium, we got Vietnam, we got all kinds of different places. Yeah. Something says, "Rest in peace, Fern." Indeed. And, ongoing processes to provide for Fern's children, and to hopefully have some process of mourning. But, yep. What do you think about communalism in a reactionary neighborhood? Probably valuable, honestly. Communalism has this language that is not yet been understood as like left revolutionary. So, not calling yourself an anarchist or a socialist or a communist is valuable right off the bat. In fact, I call yourself a social ecologist or a democratic confederalist or something. That'd probably be helpful. I think in fact, Cooperation Tulsa, I think, has benefited from being communalist rather than anarchist here in Tulsa. Alexander 5 says, "Do you think atomization of individuals in the current society leads to increased capitalist realism? Because I feel like lack of community space limits my imagination for another world." Absolutely. Yes. Hierarchy is reinforcing in this sense. It enforces its conditions onto the world. And then those conditions make people who think that those conditions are absolute, because hierarchy reinforces itself onto the world, what Bickler and Nitzen call the Cree order, or what Marx calls social reproduction. So its purpose is to reinforce itself onto the world, and then that creates beings who think that the way of things is the only way of things. Please refocus camera, very blurry. It looks like it's fixed now. I assume when you said that it was blurry, but I think it's fixed at this point. Let's see. Yeah, the more active you are, the better you feel. Generally is the way it works. Okay, opposing U.S. funding of Ukrainian war doesn't make a person a campist. Yeah. Yeah, pen archives, even people with first-hand accounts often don't get the full scope. Yeah, that's a real problem. It's a real problem. You know, you get people who are literally giving their, for example, a Berkman, Alexander Berkman's diaries about Russia. They're generally very accurate, but Berkman didn't know everything that was happening at the time. So, here and there, Berkman wasn't understanding the context of situations as they were playing out. And that's just going to happen with any source you look at in their firsthand account. Their firsthand accounts are not everything. They're helpful for understanding particulars, but often they're not as helpful for understanding wide scale occurrences that are taking place. I've got, oh, nice. Morocco. Abdelmonim Zerzain. I probably massacred that. Wow. Says, a simple hi from Morocco. That's cool. Yeah, I'm glad you're here. And then Brazil. Dang. That's pretty cool. This is awesome. Glad to have all these people here. And we got Texas, the most interesting and most obscure. Yeah, totally. Texas. Wow. Twitter DMs are blocked to verified users only, by the way. I see. Let me take a look. Okay, I'll try to change that right now. Let's see if I can change that right now. All right. Should be fixed. Go give it a go. See if it works. X Orpheus says, thoughts on scaling up community libraries into council structures, especially niche? Specialist libraries, such as ones for electronic musical instruments, art supplies, trade tools. No, I think that's something that could totally happen. You'd end up making decisions about how those things are kept, if there needs to be any rules that are developed there or community standards. You could be inviting people to a council to make decisions about it. I think in a general sense, duocracy is kind of bad. It overburdens specific people. Whereas when you create a formal structure, you can delegate things more easily. Like make sure that you always have somebody doing X and it's not always the same person doing X. Those kinds of things, rotating roles, creating those sorts of standards are all very valuable. Nice. Southeast England's, West Midlands, Atlanta. We got all kinds of stuff here. Somebody says, how do you define the word authoritarian? What does it mean for a person, a movement, or an organization to be authoritarian? Authoritarianism is the monopolization of power. Okay. So, the fewer people have control over the larger amount of power in society. You are increasing the scale of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is not an on-off switch. Okay. You aren't just are authoritarian or are not authoritarian. You are increasingly authoritarian the more pyramidal you make the structure of power. And the more distributed the power becomes, the less authoritarian that it is, the less monopolized that control is. So that, and then you'll find that a lot of anarchists writers will then also emphasize that it includes what I call domination, which is to say violence, use of violence, coercion and threat of violence, and deception. Now, I consider these two slightly different categories because you can find particular examples where one or another of these or where these are kind of decoupled in a sense. But regardless, that's what authoritarianism is. Authoritarianism is concentration, monopolization of power in the hands of a narrow group of people. The narrower the group, the more authoritarian. So a person being authoritarian is more like an expression of their ideology. So saying that a person is authoritarian is to say that they believe in authoritarianism. And it's possible you could say they were authoritarian in the sense that they are one of those controllers in an authoritarian structure. So you could say that somebody that's at the top of that pyramidal structure would be, you might call them an authoritarian. However, I personally would not give them that name. I would probably give them a name like a tyrant or a despot, or give them a specific name. They're a ruler. They are a a president or a dictator, or I'd be more specific. I generally don't refer to people as authoritarians unless I'm talking about their ideology. So then for the movement or an organization to be authoritarian is to say that it is pyramidal. Power is held by a small number of people. Decisions are made by a small number of people. And then everybody else is meant to act upon the decisions made by that small group of people. Angel Walker, hey, I'm an engineering student from New Jersey, and I was wondering if you can expand more on how technological innovations can assist with revolutionary praxis. Yeah, I'm under the impression that that's actually going to be very, very necessary. We need ways for people to be able to communicate and make decisions asynchronously. I think that's a big part of it. Because we are in an atomized world, what we have is, and what we have people, that we have no like third spaces. It can be really hard for people to come together to make decisions when they have no community space. They are very busy because we work so much. And we need asynchronous mechanisms that both create community and allow us to make decisions together. And I've heard numerous attempts at this, but I haven't heard any that have come to full fruition. So like, if I'm just ideating wildly here, something that's like a social network with a robust decision-making and federation procedure all mixed together. Okay. So where it would like build in the concept of confederation, you would have like council structures that make decisions, and those would be groups of people that have opted together. And then you'd have federations of those council structures. I'm imagining something kind of digital here, and those would be grouped together in different federations. And then you would have consensus mechanisms built in where people can create proposals and then pass them together. And at the same time, you'd want this all to be like a big social network where everybody is communicating and they're all in these different spaces. So like Mastodon plus, Lumio, but with more confederated structure, also with Basecamp. It's like Basecamp, Lumio, and Mastodon smashed together or something, that would be so useful if somebody could create that. Crazy useful. And then at the same time, if somebody could create something like a capacity monitor where people are constantly being like, I'm over capacity. I need somebody to take these tasks I've got. And it keeps track of all the tasks that they've got delegated to them. Something that keeps track of delegation, like, oh, you've been delegated to do task A, task B, and task C. And then something that's constantly like checking back with them, for example, sending them like an email being like, the date for you to finish task B was yesterday, report back. These sort of asynchronous feedback mechanisms, you might consider these to be kind of cybernetic in the sense of like Stafford Beer and cybernetics. I think these are would be an enormous boon to the movement. Now, the downside is, of course, those can be sabotaged by destroying whatever the mechanism is for us having access to those. But I just gave you a ton of ideas there. All of those ideas smashed together would, I think, be one of the most powerful revolutionary tools ever created. No joke. But it's also a lot of work to get something like that created. And there have been various people who've tried. One of the most notable, I would say, is the Dual Power app by Black Socialists in America. So anyway, Comrade Amatrine says, Bolivia. Hi from Bolivia. Nice. We got Bolivia in here too. Mephistopheles says, speaking of Marx, am I the only one who thinks that his friendship with Engels was detrimental in some way? Maybe. It's not clear how influenced by Engels Marx really was. I think there's always going to be some amount where they don't want to upset their benefactor, but Marx was open to disagreeing with Engels on a semi-regular basis, So, and it should be said, it's not clear how much Engels' ideas really would have influenced Marx to begin with. It seems like it went completely the opposite direction. But obviously, it's probably not good for your benefactor to be a capitalist. So anyway, let's see here. Pin Archive says, are you much aware of PSL? I spoke with a party organizer on Twitter Spaces the other day, and he believed that top-down is best. America is too bottom-up, but that any nation could opt out of the PSL. Yeah. I mean, the PSL is bad. It's a dangerous organization. Obviously, every local of any organization is different, so different ones are going to be worse, better and worse. But PSL has so many allegations of forming cults, of shielding people who are alleged rapists, of having no internal accountability process. PSL, once again, not all locals are going to be the same, but there's a lot of occasions of this. PSL is the continuation of the authoritarian method, of the vanguardist method, and these are just the flaws of that kind of method. So I would not recommend people join the PSL. The PSL is just the old failed methods all over again. It's distracting people. It's siloing them off into more failed vanguards. So also, we got a Denmark here, Alexander 5. Do you have any ideas of why lots of European governments have anti-immigration policies and ideology currently? Probably because the same reason why fascism is rising everywhere is that they are looking to maintain their power in a changing world. So when you are looking to maintain your power and you don't want to give people you don't want to actually give people the concessions that they need. What you try to do is you try to create enemies. You try to create external enemies, outsiders. You create inside and outside, and the outside group becomes the enemy. Now, this is an extreme oversimplification. There's a lot of details to this. But I think in Europe, what you've got is, the rise of a reactionary right who hates the multiculturalism and the pluralism of Europe. Even though that's, of course, what makes Europe powerful, they're trying to destroy that. They're trying to rekindle extreme nationalism. And so they are going to try to manage immigration. They also understand that climate catastrophe is going to push people all over the place. You're going to have huge waves of immigration going everywhere. There's also all these wars, which are obviously taking place and have been taking place. Wars also create massive waves of immigration. Countries that are well off are often going to be very resentful of immigration because immigrants are coming from a place that have very different cultural mores and that see things differently. All of these things combined together, it's not good. There we go. Camera's no longer blurry. It's fixed. So there we go. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Ethereal says opinions on Fejuve. I don't know enough about it to really say, but people have pointed to it numerous times as something that's very anarchic or horizontalist or libertarian socialist. It seems pretty cool, but I don't know enough about them to have any sophisticated comments. T. Singletary says Asana is one of the platforms that tracks tasks, delegations, and has the ability to reassign. See, that's cool. That's cool. What I wanted to get at earlier was that we have all of the things that I'm talking about. They're individually in one place or another, but that leads to cognitive overload. If I have to use 7 apps to get things done, then that's too much. What we need is some app that smashes all of these things together, that does all of them simultaneously. So I go to one place and everything's in this one place. Right now there are just too many apps. We have apps that do everything great, but that's all they do. Lumio does consensus great. Bandcamp does, task management great. Mastodon is pretty cool as a federated social network. We need something that does all of them all at once. Let's see. Clatari says, hey, everyone. Hello. Hey, Clatari. Anark here. Mephistopheles says, what is your favorite horror novel? I don't think I've read any horror novels. None come to mind, at least. Hi from Plymouth, UK. Hello, how are you? Pen Archive says, yeah, they called PSL Marxist beliefs with Leninist organizing principles. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm actually catching up now. It's happening. Here it is. I am down at the bottom of the chat. Let's see. Do you have any thoughts on how an anarchist school or educational platform like that could be implemented without detracting from the public education system like private schools do? No, unfortunately, kind of like what I had mentioned earlier was that I don't actually have a lot of insight about how to create that alternative sort of like libertarian or anarchist education system. I think I'd want to do a lot more reading into the free schools and things like that in order to get an idea of what other people have already done. That being said, insofar is that they were able to be established, I think they'd just be a net good. You know, obviously I know the public school system needs help, but insofar as that we're creating anarchist alternatives, I would just prefer the anarchist alternatives. The modernist school. Yeah. I've heard numerous examples of these. There was a period of time because I've organized with numerous people who are also educators because, you know, I've done tutoring. And we've talked about how it'd be really cool to create a free school or the modern school, as I've heard it called. So let's see. Ape Dragon says, how high would you rate the importance of space travel for the future of humanity? And do you think we have the right to transform other planets? I don't know how. Okay. It probably, I mean, I see it as an inevitability. I personally think that we're going to end up being a spacefaring species. I am not nihilistic in the sense that I think we'll destroy ourselves. I don't think we could thoroughly destroy ourselves enough in order to ever be destroyed. I think that we have far too many people on Earth for us to ever go extinct at this point. I think if we destroyed Earth, we could colonize another planet. I think that that's inevitable. That's just going to happen. That being said, do we have the right to terraform other planets? If there's no life there, yeah, sure. I don't really see any issue. There's no life, so there is nothing there that we are violating by doing so. Just endless rocks and dead planets, it doesn't matter if we terraform those. They don't have like a right in that sense, in my opinion. I think that, insofar as that we're not harming other conscious species, humanity can go and colonize other planets and there's no issue. I think terraforming is totally fine. That being said, I have no idea what the larger repercussions might be. If the repercussions are negative, then obviously we have to take the negative repercussions into account. But yeah, I mean, that's my opinion on it. I definitely don't think it's a bad thing. I think that there could be negative consequences. For example, one could be that if people think, oh, we can just go colonize Mars, they might just be like, well, screw it, just destroy Earth then. We don't really care about Earth. We already got planet B and planet C. And I think that would be a horrific outcome for humanity. That would be extremely damaging for all life, because currently the only life we know about is here on this planet. So Alexander 5 says, have you read more than half of the books in that bookshelf? Honestly, I think so. I really don't buy many books. I've been accumulating the books on that bookshelf since I was like 15 or something. So yeah, no, I should have, but maybe not much more than half. Probably like 60 or 70% if I had to guess. Nariki says, what do you think about the impending climate crisis? I think another looming refugee crisis and increase in budget spending to save first world countries will cause the rise of eco-fascism. Yeah, I think there's a very strong chance that you're right. I think that the climate crisis is already taking place, and we're already seeing that governments are responding with ecofascism. They're not there fully, but they're getting there. They're getting there. I think that, unfortunately, unfortunately, I think that the sort of like nihilist or anarcho-nihilist conception that all we're doing is waiting for, all these hierarchical power structures to fall apart, and then, the crisis will come and they'll just explode, and then, we'll be able to organize in the ashes. I think that's false. I think that under crisis, often systems get stronger, and that, even when one empire falls, often other empires rise to take its place. I think that unless we do the work of destroying hierarchical power structures and building the alternatives, that when the crisis comes, we won't be prepared to seize the vacuum, and terrible people will seize the vacuum. This is what I keep telling people. You have to prepare structures that are already stress tested for when crisis comes. You're not just going to figure it out on the spot when crisis comes. In fact, often, if you don't have something that's ready to confront the crisis when it comes, people just give in to all the old ways of doing things. You get some leader, and the leader says, I'll figure it out. I'll manage it. Right. And then they just destroy your evolution. They just destroy all of the energy that you had that was supposed to make something completely new. That's why prefiguration is so important. We need things that are ready to seize the vacuum, that have already been stress tested, that all they need is the chance to expand. Then perhaps we can live in the ashes of the old hierarchical powers. But things are not just going to get fixed when the crisis comes. Hierarchical powers may very well use it as an impetus to expand their control and power. Let's see here. Do you think Ted Kaye belongs to ecofascism? He definitely has some very worrying beliefs that I think make it to where it has some similarities to ecofascism. I definitely think that he is a form of anarcho-primitivism, or really more just like primitivism, which is kind of fascist. But I just want to emphasize that ecofascism is not necessarily kind of like us going to a primitive state of existence and then everybody turning into little fascist tribes. It's more like states are going to use ecological crisis as an opportunity to expand the fascist governance. And we're going to turn into a series of, barbed wire walled nations, which will subjugate the most impoverished people of the world under fascist government. But I definitely do think that Ted Kaye is reactionary. He's definitely not an ally of anarchists, and I think that it is damning that anyone should see him as an ally. I think that they should. If anybody is using Ted Kaye as their example, give them the side eye at all least. Now, a lot of people have been misled, and they're just kind of edgy, and they just think that, Ted Kaye represents this sort of edgy counterculture figure, but he's not an ally. I mean, he was basically, I don't know if I would say he was out and out a white supremacist, but some of the things he said are very, very close to some white supremacy. He definitely has this conception that there is like he's against like social justice culture, and he wants to abandon all that. He thinks that it would be better if we had some sort of state of existence where the survival of the fittest kind of thing, right? Like, it seems like that's what he wants. So let's see here. Miles says, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back on your conditioning. Exactly. Pin Archives. I haven't read much anarcho-nihilist theory, but Desert doesn't advocate anarchism work in the ashes, but instead that anarchism will only ever exist to the extent it does now. Yeah, that's useless in my opinion. Bailey Fry says, are you vegan? And if so, do you consider veganism an obvious extension of anarchist thought? No, I'm not vegan, mostly because of vegans' emphasis on the meat boycott. I think that the meat boycott is way overemphasized. If veganism meant being for animal liberation, then yes, I'd be a vegan, but it's not. Veganism includes the sort of boycott aspect. And I think boycotting is sort of a remainder of liberal politics, right? You know, imagine being an anti-capitalist and being against capitalism and thinking the way you end capitalism is by boycotting capitalism. That's just false. Capitalism doesn't need you, and it doesn't care if you boycott. And ultimately, your boycott is just not going to make any difference. Now, a big concerted boycott, an organized boycott could, but if you want to save animals, save animals. Stop using liberal methods like a boycott. Start using direct action like ALF uses. ALF is actually living the existence of an animal liberation perspective. They're actually freeing animals. They're actually destroying the entities that are hurting animals. Okay, that's, in my opinion, that's an actual stance that demonstrates real commitment to the value of animal liberation. I think that veganism, insofar as that we're talking about the meat boycott or the boycott of animal products, is mostly performative. It's a way of saying that you care about animals' lives, but doing nothing to actually help them. Because in practicality, you not eating meat doesn't really help those animals. You know, no cow or chicken or pig's life was ever improved by you not eating meat or not consuming animal products. You not consuming animal products did not bring a cow back to life. It did not prevent a cow from being hurt. When you buy a leather jacket, when you don't buy a leather jacket, a cow was not spared. The leather jacket already exists. The cow was killed. It was already skinned. It's a leather jacket. It's there. The consumption of the product itself is not what is leading to the animals being oppressed. It is the structures of society, the structures of subjugation over those animals that are causing animals to be subjugated. The social structures must be attacked, not the consumption habits of individuals within a capitalist society. That's my opinion. And I know lots of people don't like that perspective. That's fine. I've always been open to having this discussion with people. But yeah, so that's my perspective on that. I think people really need to make, like somebody just said, go destroy a factory farm if you want to do animal liberation. You know, like that's actually living those principles. So, let's see here. Hassan Khan, I actually answered that super early in the stream. You said, would you consider making a video debunking slanderous claims made by Bolsheviks against Mocknevist movements and the ML's parrot today? I already answered it. What I said was, if it were like an Anark abridged or an Anark responds, probably not. I don't want to do that kind of thing off the cuff. And I generally haven't been doing any historical video essays lately. So probably not, but it's not impossible. There might be conditions under which I would do it. If somebody could provide me a particular document, it's possible I would respond to it. Let's see. Mephistopheles says, what do you think of the Paris Commune? I think the Paris Commune was very inspiring. I think that it was so libertarian socialist that it literally changed the minds of major thinkers, as even Marx and Engels changed their ideology or changed their conception afterwards. It was very inspiring. That being said, it was incomplete, right? It was still very representative, not as much directly democratic as it should have been. But let's see. Mephistopheles says, because that significant historical event is viewed by MLs, trots, and anarchists as their own. But in my studies, I've seen that it lacked an ideology and incorporated both authoritarian and libertarianism. Yeah, that seems about right. Oh my gosh. It seems to me that it still had some representative aspects. But at the time, it was a vindication of anarchism, because at the time, all of the authoritarians were statists and basically social democrats, and they thought you were going to do it through parliamentarianism. So the Paris Commune was actually an example of how you could do it from the bottom up, and that's why it was so transformative for so many different ideologies. However, what they took from that was, well, yeah, from the bottom up, but then a hierarchy. Maja or Maha, I don't know, says, or Maya, I don't know. What do you think about Jonathan Nitzan in his book, Capital's Power? I've actually cited Bickler and Nitzan's book in several of my videos. So you should, if you're interested in my thoughts about Capital's Power, you should watch my video Power, but you should also watch my videos, A Modern Anarchism, part one specifically, but then you probably want to continue to watch 2 and 3 afterwards. Let's see here. S. Hopt says, thoughts on 15-minute cities. The general idea is that all daily necessities should be within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of where people live, in case you're unfamiliar with the term. Yeah, no, I think it's good. It's a good idea. If you could do it, that's great. That would be a much more sustainable urban setting than the one we've currently got. It's bizarre to me that over in Europe, there is some like huge, like fiery debate. And like the right has just like made up all of this stuff about 15-minute cities. But no, it seems pretty obvious to me. Like, you know, insofar as that your city is getting so unusable that people have to travel more than 15 minutes to get to basic amenities, you're screwing it up. I think that in a general sense, you should be trying to decentralize assets in that so that you have people that can get anything they need within 15 minutes of where they are, especially if it were 15 minutes by bike. That would be fantastic, but not always that easy. That being said, it's totally doable. You know, one of the things about the state is the state could do so much more than it is doing. It just refuses to do so because it doesn't want to. It wants subjugation. It wants people to live difficult lives. It wants people to be forced into exhaustion so that all they have time to do is work. So very doubtful that you're going to see anywhere but the most progressive social democracies do anything with that. Or if they do, it will be very, minor. Won't amount to a whole lot. Angel asks, what are your thoughts on decentralized energy generation and storage, and what route do you expect it to take if it were to come to fruition? Honestly, once you study energy generation to any extensive degree, you kind of realize that almost every form is probably going to need to be utilized in one place or another. Now, I will say that I really don't support the use of fossil fuels under any circumstance, but I think we're going to have a mosaic of, for example, nuclear power, solar energy, all kinds of other stuff, all woven together, hydroelectric, thermal, all of that stuff woven together in different contexts. So, as far as storage goes, storage is actually is the hard part. The energy generation part, people act like we have all this we have this long run to go. No, we've honestly got that part so nailed down. It's like wild. The storage part is the hard part, mostly because batteries, the better the battery gets, the more exotic the materials needed to make it, basically. And so we will need to store the energy we're making because, for example, nuclear energy, solar energy, thermal energy, hydroelectric, these are constant sources of production, and they're going to produce even when you don't need as much as they're producing. And they're not going to produce when you do need the energy. So what you need is storage, and batteries, as I said, require very exotic materials the better they get. So what we really need at this point is some kind of battery that is not exotic and is not just going to be discarded once it's used up somehow. Like the battery needs to be recyclable, in other words. So we're closer than we've ever been to doing what I'm saying right now, but we still have some way to go. And it's mostly there at the batteries. So Agit Ball says, after a modern anarchism, do you have other ideas planned? Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it abstractly, you know, nothing concrete has come to mind, except for I've thought about doing a video about the self. You know, what is the role of the self, of mind and personhood and all of that in political theory, right? And I think it could be helpful insofar as, you know, like earlier, somebody in the chat was like, you know, I'm distressed. I usually I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing, but I've been bad at it. I think it would almost be like anarchist self-help. Obviously, you know that I wouldn't let it devolve to that level, but that would be kind of like what it is. It's almost like an inspection of a bunch of philosophies of self and synthesizing them together into a modern anarchist theory of self. And I think it could be very valuable in that sense. That's just one I've thought about. But yeah, I've thought about all kinds of stuff. Or rather, I've ideated about all kinds of stuff. That one's the one that's become most concrete. Hassan says, how should anarchists express actionable solidarity with the indigenous Palestinians facing genocide from the colonial power of Israel? That one's really hard because the truth is we can make statements of solidarity, but here we have very little power to actually change any of the things that are being done. Now, you could protest your government offering funds to Israel, but I got to say, if you're in the US, tough luck. Both parties are going to disagree with you. In fact, there's almost no way they're ever going to do it. They're never going to defund Israel. So with that in mind, they're pretty much just going to be statements of solidarity. Now, another thing you could do if you somehow found the right interlocutor is get assets to Gaza. If you can do that, that's the ideal, because there's not a whole lot other than that you can do. Providing materials, providing, resources, that kind of stuff would be probably the most valuable thing you could do, but also good luck because they can't even get out. So chances are not strong you're ever going to get in. But that's kind of one of the most horrifying parts, is that Gaza is this little tiny boxed in area that is just being bombed into rubble with people inside of it. And there's almost no way to get in or out. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. But I don't know. I'll think longer on it because I imagine there's probably more to that than I've laid out just in that. Is this a Mountain Dew Zero ad? Mountain Dew Zero. Approved by Anark. Ding. Yes. Ding. If I had an editor right now, that's what I'd have them do. All right. Oh, I'm getting more now. Now I got to mute. I got to mute another one. Mute that one. Go. So let's see here. Give me just a moment. The Mountain Dew ad is too real. Okay. All right. Doing stuff, doing things. All right. Okay. Trying to catch back up now. Mephistopheles asks, which figure in the history of humanity do you think was the most harmful? Wow. I don't think I could answer that. That's just like, there's so many figures that have done so much damage. I plead the fifth. I couldn't tell you what the answer to that is. Pen Archive says, anarchist is Buddhist pilled. I've been influenced by many philosophies to get here. When I was young, I was definitely very influenced by Buddhism, Stoicism, and absurdist existentialism. So combining all those together is how you get a Daniel. All it took was Mountain Dew to turn him ANCAP. That's what happened. I'm an ANCAP now. You just clip that one. Ruin my reputation. Fruma says, unrelated, but do you think Rojava has a state? Honestly, it is starting to develop one. I've been not calling it a state because it's not fully a state. It seems like that they still have a considerable decentralization of power, but it seems like it is slowly developing one. It began with the military command. So it seems like they are centralizing some power, and I do think that that is a considerable failure point. I'm afraid that what will happen is that will consume more power, and then we will see the end of the libertarian socialist experiment in Rojava. But at the moment, I think I've called it like a mini state or, a proto state or something. But yeah. How long will this live show last? Why is it now 11:59 p.m. in Italy? I don't know. I didn't even set out a particular length this one was going to be. How long have I been on now? My God. Stream settings. I don't even know how long I've been doing this. It's been a long time at this point. Feels like what, 3.5 hours or something? Let's see. Yeah. Like over 3 hours. Anyway. Do you think the situation in Palestine could have a significant radicalizing impact? Lots of people will be realizing that their country's government and politicians support the genocide of Palestinians. I think it could have some radicalizing impact, yes. However, I do think it kind of falls on the lines of current political opinions already. I think that most people already recognized that their government supported Israel over Palestine, obviously with some exceptions. And so probably it's just going to radicalize people with their current political orientations. I find it unlikely it's going to drive anybody to have a more revolutionary view, but I could be wrong. It's hard to say which way that will go. I think that always, with almost any event, you're going to see some people will be radicalized into a revolutionary perspective by big events. But I think that, unfortunately, it already kind of falls down the lines that are seen within the current political atmosphere. So you could probably just you'll get almost all of the politicians siding with Israel. Some of them will basically do, minor lip service to Palestine. And then you'll get pretty much all of the usual suspects, anarchists and the leftists of various kinds saying, oh, that's screwed up. And average people are just going to be like, well, I don't know, another genocide. And I'm moving on. I'm going to go back to work. So we'll see. We shall see. I mean, as it escalates, maybe, especially if you see lots of protests taking place. If it ends up making the difference between politicians being in office or not, you might see some difference. But yeah, I think unfortunately, probably not, but not in a significant sense. Manufactured consent will see to it most people will consent to the massacre of Palestinians. Yeah, I think that's pretty much accurate. Natalie McNamara says, you've mentioned the importance of horizontal organizations confederating with each other. How do you imagine that happening in the future with the groups you're a part of, for example? We actually have already developed a confederation here in town. It's called Redbud. Redbud is actually the federation we exist under with Scissortail. And so, as soon as there are more horizontal organizations that want to confederate into that structure, then they can. So we've already developed our confederation here, and it works to do what it needs to do, which is to say to coordinate resources and communication between our groups. well, I'm probably going to be ending here in the next, 10, 20 minutes. I'm starting to run low on energy, and I haven't even eaten today. So, Mel, see you later, Mel. Mephistopheles says, what do you think of synthesism? And as an specificist, what are your criticisms? I mean, synthesism I actually really enjoyed reading most of the synthesis literature that I read, but I think the problem is that, and lots of people have pointed out after watching A Modern Anarchism, that they're like, you seem like you're a synthesist anarchist because you like find that there's value in egoist anarchism and Max Stirner and so on. The problem is that I'm a social anarchist insofar as I think the social anarchists were right. Like if there was a debate between the two, I think the social anarchists won the debate. So I'm not a synthesist anarchist because I'm not like, hands off, I don't know who's correct. I think the social anarchists are correct. However, I do think that the egoist anarchists or individualist anarchists sometimes are good at pointing out blind spots for social anarchists. So, my criticisms of synthesist anarchism is that it attempts to make people join together into groups who are often not going to be able to cooperate. That being said, I do think that there should be synthesist federations. I just think that organizations themselves probably, it's like the way I look at it is, can you agree to the platform? Then you're welcome. Right? Cool. You consider yourself an individualist anarchist, but you agree with the platform, you're in. That's fine. But I don't think that we should be creating, a platform that's so open that it like agrees to both philosophies, because I think the two philosophies have notably different approaches. You can't do an organization that does both philosophies. Now, federation allows the two groups to do their own philosophy within their autonomous entity. That could work out. So I think synthesist federations could be good. But that's essentially my perspective on that. Jerubot says, opinion on whether we should organize with IWW or is it better to work with IWA? I won't pretend to know enough about those sort of inter-org politics to comment. I would say do whatever feels right. I think the IWW has good politics in general, but I haven't known a whole lot about them being super effective lately. I don't know almost anything about IWA other than some people have been talking to me about them a little bit more lately. So, Pazel says, how does delegation interact with consensus? Because on one hand, the delegate has the job to properly argue for their municipality, and on the other side, they have to get consensus. Well, that's exactly what it is. They have to get consensus to be delegated. You don't just have standalone delegates. You only elect a delegate to do a task. The delegate only does a task. So the delegate only argues for the people if they've already reached consensus, and then elected a delegate to argue the consensus at a higher level, or they delegated somebody to do a task. So there's no real conflict because delegation comes after consensus. Unless you're talking about that in after the revolution, where there's that period where you have people that disagree, and then you would just be talking about the consensus among a smaller group, and then they elect delegates, and the delegates argue, and then everybody makes decisions, and that you arrive at consensus afterwards. So Panstorm asks, do you have a Discord group or server? Yes, I used to give it out on stream sometimes, but I've been a little more selective lately because, what I found is that if I make it too open, then we get people who get in there and everybody gets into big arguments with each other and people are always butting heads. So what I've been doing is mostly keeping it to a very small group of people and anybody who becomes a patron. So if you are a patron and you want on the Discord server, just ask, send me a DM anywhere. That should be some impetus as well to go become a patron at my Patreon, patreon.com/Anark. But mostly I've been offering it to a select few people and patrons. And that's been working out pretty well. My past with just opening it up to a huge flood of people when I made it available was not very good. It didn't work out very well. World War Ride says, do you have a favorite BMX rider? I don't know anything about, I'm not into sports of any kind, really. Even the sports that I kind of enjoy, like MMA, I still don't really pay attention to it. So, David Sipos says, hey, Anark, how would one develop a framework to answer to critiques of anarchism when people are not satisfied with the answers to the usual critiques? Well, it would have to be on a case-to-case basis. You know, you're probably not going to create a single all-enveloping framework. But I'd be interested in your thoughts if you can think of something like that. But, you know, ultimately, you know, what usually happens when you're talking about developing answers to critiques is you just create a document somewhere where you keep a list of all of the critiques and all of the responses. And then if somebody doesn't like one of the responses, then you just edit the document to include, you know, certain exceptions and so on. Let's see here. Benjamin Allison says, can you speak on the actions that Scissortail and Cooperation Tulsa do? Like how effective both groups been in long-term revolutionary goals? So Scissortail has mostly focused, there was a time when Scissortail was doing lots of free stores, which say what we'd do is we'd go out and provide clothing and amenities to homeless people. And I wouldn't say that had really a revolutionary thrust. It was mostly harm reduction, but it was a great way to, you know, provide amenities to people who were underprivileged. Scissortail was probably more revolutionary in spreading theory insofar as that we would go table and then we would have like conversations with people about anarchism in public places, and we would sell books of theory and so on. I think that had a more revolutionary thrust. We still haven't been doing a whole lot of that lately, but we might return to it. Cooperation Tulsa, I would say, has been more revolutionary in the sense that we've actually been able to establish community councils. We've created neighborhood gardens in historically black churches, Church of the Restoration and AME church there in the Greenwood district, which is the home of the Greenwood massacre. That was, I would say, highly successful. We also own 2.5 acres of land, which we are now cultivating. And this is, I think, the construction of dual power, which is to say a way that we could begin growing food, creating spaces for people to meet, redeveloping community. I think that stuff has been very successful. We've also had reading groups, which leads to ideology or, consciousness building and ideological development. I think that stuff has been very successful. So, Scissortail is much smaller, and Cooperation Tulsa is much larger. So Cooperation Tulsa has a lot more momentum behind it. I think has been more successful in that sense. It's been involved in a lot of projects. So yeah, I think that hopefully that answer makes sense. They're continuing on to this point. Let's see. Okay, so we're in the last round of answers here. I'm probably going to end in about 5 minutes. Already mentioned how anarchism might interact with education, which is say I don't have a whole lot of information on that. Not going to pretend to be an expert. How do you see the communal federative structure in large urban environments, like when a city has millions of people? Yes, I think that could totally be feasible. I think that what you'd have to do is you'd have to essentially make a bunch of these councils. The councils would come to agreements by themselves. Then they would delegate people, and then those would come together and argue for the decisions that have already been made by the smaller councils. And then you would scale up. But really, all you would need to do is just take account of how many of those individual councils have said yes or no. So, all you'd really have to do is take a tally. We've got 90 councils and we got 85 of them came to consensus. 5 of them didn't. Cool. Now you're just really asking what's going on with those 5. You might see delegates from the other councils to discuss with the 5 councils who didn't agree. There's all kinds of mechanisms to make it work. Technology would probably be extremely helpful in the process, would create an ability to vote asynchronously. It would also create the ability for very large groups of people to come together and make decisions together. I think that it's totally feasible. I think that in a general sense, the reason why people are skeptical of it is because they have a hard time imagining we're going to get lots of people engaged in the process. But that's because we live in a representative democracy where, of course, people are not engaged in the process. They have no power. All they do is vote. So I think when people feel like they actually have power, when their word matters, when the deliberation actually makes them feel involved and included, you can get people to come to consensus on large scale things. And I think by combining the consensus of a bunch of these smaller councils, you can most certainly get consensus at a larger scale. That's my perspective. See, Pen Archives is the whole point of synthesis anarchism to me is that federating of anarchist ideas across the spectrum as anarchism is attempted in many contexts. Yes, but it should be said that synthesists also wanted to make attempts to make synthesist organizations, and that's really where my criticism lies. I think that it's fine if it can be done, but I think it doesn't generally work out, and it didn't work out so great for them when they were trying to do it either. Mephistopheles, from what I've seen, many controversies stemmed from poor miscommunication and fact that many anarchists were already anti-organizationalists themselves. In my opinion, the platform and the synthesis are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, we'd have to get into details, what we mean by synthesist anarchism, what we mean by the platform. I think you could build a synthesist platform. And once again, I'm open to it if it works, but I think what you'll generally find is that it doesn't work out so hot. Individualist anarchists don't really want to play by those rules. They want affinity groups and informality and duocracy. Anyway, let's see. We only got 3 minutes. Downstairs says, "Hey, Anark, not sure if it's too soon or topical, but what is the anarchist solution for Palestine? Sorry to shoot you down here, but we've discussed that very extensively in the live stream already. So if you want to rewatch this one after, there's lots of discussion about Palestine and Israel during this live stream." Silfrena says, "Blue Sky is currently making something similar to what you talked about earlier with Federation of Communities, their AT protocol." Yes, but that's only one of the components. We also need decentralized decision making. We need confederation structures. We need task delegation. We need task monitoring. We need lots of stuff. So I'm looking for a platform that smashes them all together. And whoever creates that could be revolutionary. But it only containing one or another of them can lead to overwhelm, because then you need people to use like 6 platforms to get everything done. I agree that there are people doing different parts of it currently. There's already people doing all of the parts I've mentioned in pieces. Can I get links and articles for ideas like this? Not sure exactly which one you were discussing there. Panos Rusas says, "Random question, because if I remember correctly, you wrote fantasy. Do you prefer to definitely hard magic systems? I fell out of love with soft magic systems very young. I hated the magic done it explanation. I always want more substance. I like when things have rules and they're crunchy and you can reason it out, yet there's lots of room for complexity and flexibility. I like hard magic systems for the same reason I like having limits on my art, so that it gives me room to operate, but not so much room that it becomes amorphous. So I much prefer a hard magic system." Puzzle says, "I more so meant that if you delegate someone, as far as I understood, they are supposed to argue for your case, and that stands in conflict to compromising with other delegates." They're supposed to argue your case, but the delegates the delegates aren't the ones making the decision necessarily. The delegates are supposed to bring it all back, and then there's decisions at the smaller level. But we'd have to really get into the crunchy details of what exact structure for delegation we're talking about, and at what scale, and all of that. So perhaps that's my fault for being too vague in all of these statements. I think we'd have to get into more detail to really figure out what we're both getting at here. I wear a shirt. "Hi, Daniel. A bit late. What is the best approach to debate enlightened centrists? It's pretty hard to break through when they feel like they're more reasonable than you. You have to demonstrate they're not reasonable. You have to point out the logical inconsistencies, the impracticality of their viewpoint. Demonstrate to them that they don't know what they're talking about, that they are highly ineffective, and that they enable the rise and the ascendancy of fascism through their ineffectiveness. And this is not even rhetorical. This is factual. Just cite history and learn about the history of their ineffectiveness. There are so many different places that talk about why they're so bad at what they do. And they're highly ineffective, even though they claim otherwise. But you need to break their chokehold over being the reasonable person in the room. You have to demonstrate that they are not the adult in the room. You have to become the adult in the room. That's very hard, but it can be done. So I'm just going to stop it there. I'm going to have to cut it. I know people are asking more questions, but I think that's about it. I just want to emphasize, if this is your first time ever coming to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. Like this video. I don't know why, though. I don't think it'll ever get pushed in the algorithm. But anyway, I appreciate you all being here. If you stayed this long, if you like this live stream, if you want to be able to do more live streams like this, go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch. And I really appreciate y'all coming here. This is a pretty good live stream. I think we got a concurrent viewers. Ended up getting like 80 or something, which is pretty good. These get pretty solid viewership, I've been noticing. So people seem to like them. But that's about it. I appreciate everybody who did super chats during the chat here. And recall, if you want to get on the Discord, just become a patron for any amount as cheap as $2, but there's $2, $5, $7, $10, $20. I don't know, bunch of different tiers. Please go become a patron. That's about it. I think that's about it. My throat is getting sore from talking constantly for like 3.5 hours. I appreciate y'all being here, and I'll see you next time.